When autumn descends and the first gentle rains tap softly against the window, something deep within your soul begins to stir. Carl Jung once said, "In each of us, there's a place of refuge only silence can reveal." Tonight, amid the tender sound of rain and the warm golden glow of the lamp, that journey quietly awaits you. 6 hours of cozy autumn. Rain, calm, bedtime. Stories for Adults is more than a collection of bedtime tales. It is a dialogue between you and the deepest layers of your own being. Every drop of rain is a heartbeat of the unconscious. Every story page, a mirror reflecting what you may have forgotten. Your fears, your dreams, and the light you once lost. Let the soothing voice of Tom Jones guide you down leaf-covered streets, past old houses veiled in mist, and finally back to the most peaceful place of all, the one within yourself. Because sometimes, to truly awaken, we must dare to be still in the rain of autumn. 1. The road, out of town. That afternoon, the sky wore a pale gray mist. The small town lay still beneath a fine drizzle, as if holding on to the last breath of autumn. The narrator sat behind the wheel, watching droplets fall slowly across the windshield, then dissolve, joining into long streaks like currents of memory flowing in reverse. The road ahead curved through rows of withered golden trees, leading toward distant hills where the fog had already begun to swallow the horizon. There was no music, no voices, only the sound of rain and the steady hum of the engine, like a heartbeat. The outside world blurred away, leaving only the narrator's private space, an enclosed world between the car's glass and their own breath. In the melancholic light of late afternoon, the town gradually receded behind, revealing a strange sensation, at once liberating and empty. This was not merely a departure, it was an escape. The narrator was not leaving a place so much as leaving a former life, where familiar faces had grown distant and the social roles had grown heavy. On the small, rain-slick road, they thought of Carl Jung's words, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Perhaps in this very moment, amid the falling rain, they were beginning another kind of dream, a dream that turns inward, because sometimes we must step away from the outer world to hear the true voice of the soul. The car rolled slowly past bare fields, where the last few leaves clung to branches, trembling in the wind. The landscape seemed to mirror the mood, a fragile quiet, as though everything were preparing for a transformation the narrator could not yet name. In that moment, they realized they no longer belonged to any particular place, no longer a person of the town, not yet a person of the destination. They were suspended between two worlds, between the known and the unknown, between consciousness and the unconscious. A wind swept through, carrying the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. That fragrance stirred distant memories, childhood days walking in the forest, listening to rain drumming on a tin roof, feeling a mother's hand placed upon a shoulder. The memories rose and fell away, as if time itself were testing them. Do you dare to remember, so that you may finally forget? Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. No awakening arrives without suffering." And perhaps the very quiet enveloping them, the falling rain, the gray sky, the empty road, was a silent kind of pain, but a necessary one. It was the dissolution of what was old, making room for something coming to birth. The first golden lights flickered on within the fog, scattering across the raindrops like grains of glitter. The narrator did not know where they were truly going, only that the road led to a place called Sleepy Hill Manor, a name both beautiful and mysterious. An old friend, in a peculiar letter, had invited them there. The letter said the house had been inherited by a distant relative and that they could come at any time. An old house on a hill where the clock had stopped, where an oil lamp still burned each night. Merely reading that, they had felt a vague compulsion, as if the house itself were calling. The farther they drove, the heavier the rain became. The streaks on the glass bled into one another. turning the outer world into a distortion. Trees into shadows, the road into bands of light, and even their own reflection in the mirror slowly smearing into haze. They felt as though they were driving through a dream of their own making. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung's words resounded in the mind. Perhaps this was the beginning of that privilege, the journey toward becoming their true self. With every meter of road, another mask slipped away. With every raindrop against the glass, an old memory was washed clean. Ahead, the road began to narrow. On both sides, tall maples arched their crowns together like a vaulted ceiling leading into another world. The reds and golds of the leaves mingled with the car's headlights, weaving a dim, otherworldly glow, like a doorway between the real and the dream. The narrator drew a deep breath. The air carried a chill and the scent of wood smoke from distant houses, the smell of autumn slowly coming to a close. They eased off the accelerator. In that instant, a vague feeling crept into the mind. Perhaps they were traveling to a place that did not exist on any map, but within their own soul. Perhaps Sleepy Hill Manor was not only a house, but a symbol, an architecture of the unconscious, where the forgotten parts were waiting to be heard. Inside the car, condensation from their breath filmed the glass. The narrator reached out to wipe it away and saw the road still opening ahead, narrow, winding, hidden within the forest shadow. A distant thunder rolled. The rain began to fall harder, but they did not turn back. An invisible pull, half fear, half fascination, drew them onward. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Perhaps it was this fate that was carrying them toward Sleepy Hill Manor, where what had been buried would speak, where the unconscious would be seen in the light of awareness. The road grew emptier. The last utility poles slipped behind. Only darkness remained now, and rain, and the dim sweep of headlights skimming over waterlogged trunks. And within the narrator, something gradually brightened. Not fear, but the sense of nearing a reunion with a part of themselves long abandoned in the stretched-out years. The car moved on, slow and sure. The rain kept falling. And ahead, where the fog thickened, they knew that the real journey, the inward journey, had only just begun. 2. The invitation and the key. The wooden box sat quietly on the table, covered in a thin layer of dust, as though it had been waiting there for a very long time. The narrator gazed at it for a while, in silence, not knowing why such a simple object could make their heart race so fast. Outside, the rain continued to fall, tapping steadily on the window, a background melody for a moment that, though they did not yet know it, was about to open the door to destiny. The accompanying letter was written in a slanted classical script, as if from another era. "I send you this key," the old friend wrote. "The house has been passed down to me, but I believe it has been waiting for you rather than for me. Come when it rains, and you will understand." The narrator touched the box gently. The wood was cold and smooth, carrying a faint scent of old resin, the breath of time itself. They lifted the lid, and inside, nestled in gray velvet, lay a heavy brass key. The dim evening light glimmered upon its surface, making it glow like an ancient relic. Somehow, in that moment, they felt something profound, as if the key were not meant to unlock a physical door, but to open something within. A memory, a dream, or a fragment of the soul long sealed away. They recalled Carl Jung's words, "The house of the psyche has many rooms, and most of them are still unexplored." Carl Jung, the structure and dynamics of the psyche. Could it be that the house mentioned by the friend, Sleepy Hill Manor, was merely the outer image of the inner house of the soul, a place where forgotten rooms were waiting to be opened? That night, they could not sleep. The rain whispered endlessly outside. In the darkness, pale moonlight fell through the window, reflecting off the brass key lying on the table. Each time their eyes met it, that mixture of fear and curiosity returned. They thought of the times in life they had received strange invitations, a dream repeating again and again, a bird appearing where none should be, a moment of coincidences so uncanny that one could not call it chance. Jung called such moments synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that the rational mind cannot explain. Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. Carl Jung, Letters, Volume 2. And this time, the invitation had come from an old friend, someone long lost to time. Yet perhaps it wasn't a person at all, but a part of themselves. A part longing to be heard, remembered, redeemed. They lifted the key. It was freezing cold, strangely heavy, as if it carried the memory of generations. Perhaps it had passed through many hands, opened many doors, witnessed many stories, and now it rested in theirs, as if continuing a lineage. We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. Carl Jung, Civilization in Transition. The narrator sighed. Perhaps this was one of those encounters where one is called to meet oneself again in another form, at another place. The next morning, the sky was still gray, mist clinging to the earth. The narrator prepared to leave, carrying the wooden box and the letter. Inside, they could feel a quiet pull, as though Sleepy Hill Manor itself was calling them home. On the road, they pondered the meaning of the key. Among all the symbols Jung had interpreted, the key was one of the most sacred, the symbol of unlocking the unknown, of transformation. The key symbolizes access to the treasure house of knowledge, the self. Carl Jung, Psychology and Alchemy. They understood that this key would not merely open the door of that old house, but also the path toward the self, the center of the soul, where light and shadow intertwine. But to reach it, one must cross the threshold, daring to open what has never been faced. For as Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung, C.W. des Nenger. The archetypes and the collective unconscious. Indeed, every time they imagined stepping into that house, their heart beat faster. Not from excitement, but from fear. The fear that when the door opened, what awaited would not be a room, but the deepest recesses of their own being. That afternoon, they stopped by the roadside, holding the key in their hand. The sun was fading behind the trees. Droplets lingered on the metal, reflecting pinpoints of light like stars. In that twilight glow, a realization dawned. The key was a reminder that everything they had been searching for had never been outside. It had always been waiting to be unlocked from within. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, Ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self. They clenched the key tightly, as if holding their destiny itself. A quiet wave of emotion rose, a blend of fear and gratitude. For sometimes, life does not send us answers, but sends us a door. And a key only holds meaning when we have the courage to walk forward and turn it. When night fell, they found a small inn by the roadside. The rain had returned, gentle but constant. They placed the key on the table and gazed at it for a long while. Under the warm lamplight, it no longer looked cold. Something within it had grown warm, not from the metal, but from within them. They smiled faintly. Though they did not know what awaited ahead, they felt that something within had already begun to change, because the very act of accepting the invitation had already transformed them. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Carl Jung, Civilization in Transition. Perhaps tonight, amid the rain and the soft light, they had begun to accept that truth, to accept the journey, accept destiny, and accept themselves. Outside, the rain kept falling, as though the sky too were cleansing something unseen. The narrator closed their eyes, letting their breath merge with the sound of the rain, and whispered, not knowing whether to themselves or to the distant house waiting on the hill, "Tomorrow I will come, and when I do, I will bring the key. 3. The gatekeeper's warning. The old iron gate emerged through the dense mist and rain, as if it had stood there for centuries waiting for this very moment. The rusted bars intertwined to form an arch, covered in moss and rain-soaked leaves. The narrator stopped the car and turned off the engine. The hum faded, leaving only the sound of rain, soft then steady, like the breath of some sleeping creature. They stepped out, their shoes sinking into the soft mud, and slowly approached the gate. From the other side, an old figure appeared, tall, thin, wrapped in a long ash-gray coat. His silver hair clung wet against his head, yet his eyes were bright, deep, and startlingly awake. It seemed he had been standing there long before, as if he already knew the stranger would come. He did not ask for a name, nor did he seem surprised. He simply looked closely at them, then spoke, his voice rough and low, as though drawn up from the earth itself. "Storm's coming. Old houses have strange sounds on nights like this." A gust of wind swept through, carrying the chill of damp air, making his words echo like a prophecy. The narrator swallowed hard. For a brief instant, they felt as though it was not merely a man speaking, but the voice of the house itself, of the land, something deeper, more ancient, speaking through the mouth of the gatekeeper. He handed them a brass key. It wasn't the same one from the letter. This one was smaller, older, worn smooth by time. His hand trembled slightly, yet his gaze remained steady. "Take it," he said. "It will open the gate, but only the gate. What lies beyond is your choice." The narrator stayed silent. They could feel the weight of the key in their palm, not just metal, but responsibility. They were standing at a boundary. On one side lay the world of reason, order, and light. On the other, the realm of shadow, where the unknown awaited recognition. In Carl Jung's psychology, the gatekeeper is the threshold guardian, the keeper of the boundary between consciousness and the unconscious. Every soul, before beginning the journey of self-discovery, must encounter this figure, the ancient wisdom within that tests us through fear. Storm's coming was not merely about the weather, it was a premonition of the soul. The storm approaching was not outside, but within, where long-buried memories, fears, and desires were beginning to rise. The narrator looked up at the sky. Dark clouds had gathered, wind whipping through the trees, the scent of lightning thick in the air. Everything seemed to wait for a breaking point. They remembered Jung's words. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Carl Jung, CWUPNI, the archetypes and the collective unconscious. This storm, they understood, was not meant to destroy, but to cleanse. For within chaos, there is always a deeper order, one that reveals itself only when we dare to look directly into our fear. As the gatekeeper studied them for a long time, as if measuring their courage. "Old houses have strange sounds," he repeated, but this time his voice was softer, deeper, as though speaking to the house behind him. A shiver ran down the narrator's spine. In their mind appeared a hazy vision, moss-covered walls, spiraling staircases, doors creaking open in the rain, and somewhere a distant voice rising from deep within, not another's but their own from long ago. The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. Carl Jung, CWUPNI, the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Jung's words echoed within like a haunting resonance. The gatekeeper was not merely guarding a house. He embodied the shadow, that inner presence we so often avoid. When he warned of strange sounds in old houses, he was really saying, prepare to hear the voice of your own soul. The narrator gripped the key tightly and slowly pushed open the gate. The hinges screamed, long and aching like the breath of an ancient being. As the gate opened, a rush of cold wind enveloped them, curling like unseen hands. Ahead, the stone path wound upward toward a darkened manor, where faint lights still flickered in the windows, like silent eyes watching. They turned to thank the gatekeeper, but he was gone. Only a dim oil lamp remained by the gate, its flame trembling in the wind. In that moment, the narrator felt as though they were part of an old ritual, the pilgrim receiving a flame from the guardian, who then withdraws, leaving them to walk the rest of the path alone. When they took a deep breath, the air was thick with the scent of wet earth, rust, and wind, a raw fragrance that made them strangely alert. The storm was drawing near now. Thunder cracked in the distance, and each flash of lightning illuminated the path ahead, winding, leaf-strewn, blanketed in white mist. They began to walk, carrying the warning in their mind like a sacred mantra. Old houses have strange sounds. Yes, every old soul has strange sounds too. The echoes of years unhealed, the whispers of dreams left unfinished, the calling of forgotten selves. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, Ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self. Those words now felt like a key unlocking awareness. All those strange sounds did not come to frighten, but to remind that nothing ever truly disappears. Every memory, every emotion, every rejected part of ourselves is still alive, waiting to be seen. The gate closed behind them with a heavy sound, sealing the moment. The narrator knew that as it shut, not only the outer world was left behind, but also the person they used to be. Before them lay the journey inward, through the storm, through the darkness, through the strange sounds of the soul. Yet this time, they no longer feared, for as Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung, CW Tur 13, Alchemical Studies. The narrator smiled faintly. They understood now. The old gatekeeper was not a figure of warning, but of guidance. He had not frightened them, only reminded them, before there is light, there must always be a storm. And so, beneath the pouring autumn rain, they stepped forward, through the gate, through the fear, and into the waiting darkness. 4. The first glimpse of the manor. The gravel road climbed upward, winding like a gray thread through a forest of maples turned to gold. The rain fell steadily, each drop heavy like time itself, tapping upon the earth. The narrator slowed the car. The sound of tires grinding over gravel mingled with distant thunder. An echo that seemed to come from another realm, where space and memory intertwined. Then, at the final bend, as the thin mist drifted apart in the cold wind, they saw it. The house, Sleepy Hill Manor. Standing tall upon the hilltop, it appeared like a dream from a forgotten century. Walls the color of dark wine, steep roofs carpeted with moss, and slender towers piercing the ashen sky. Dim light glowed from the round windows, reflecting flashes of lightning, as if 100 eyes were awakening from a long sleep. The narrator stopped the car. Their hands still rested on the steering wheel, but their heart had already moved beyond the body. In that moment, they could no longer tell whether they were looking at the house or the house was looking at them. There was something hauntingly familiar in the scene. A part of them whispered that they had been here before. Not in this lifetime, perhaps, but in a dream, or in the faint ancestral memory of the soul. The house possessed a beauty that took one's breath away, yet beneath that beauty lay an unease, as though its grandeur was concealing something deep and hidden. The wind swept across the hill, bending the trees. The rain grew heavier, urgent. The narrator inhaled deeply, letting the moisture fill their lungs. The air was thick with the scent of earth, rotting wood, and rusted iron, an aroma both alive and ancient, like the soul of the place itself. In Jungian psychology, a house upon a hill is a timeless symbol of the soul. It is not merely a dwelling, but an image of the psyche, where each room represents a level of consciousness and the unconscious. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The house seemed to me a kind of image of the psyche. The ground floor represented the conscious mind, the first floor, the personal unconscious, and the cellar, the collective unconscious." Looking up at Sleepy Hill Manor, the narrator saw not just a structure, but a map of the self. The lit room above, the small, flickering light of consciousness. The shadowed lower levels, where memories, fears, and ancient dreams slept. And they understood. To cross that threshold would not merely mean entering a house, but stepping into their own soul. Against the dim sky, the dark wine bricks glowed strangely bright. It was the color of blood, of vitality, of life itself, yet also the color of transformation and sacrifice. The alchemists called it rubedo, the final stage of the soul's transmutation. In alchemy, the red stage symbolizes the completion of the work, the uniting of opposites, the emergence of the self. Carl Jung, Psychology and Alchemy. The narrator did not know that this red hue was the mark of destiny, both invitation and warning. Something within, reason, emotion, intuition whispered in unison. This is no ordinary journey. Their eyes traced the spires reaching toward the sky. Each tower was like an arrow pointed to the divine, symbolizing the soul's striving toward higher consciousness, toward the light beyond shadow. Yet below, the round windows resembled mandalas, symbols of wholeness, of the soul finding itself. Both existed together, the tower and the circle, the ascent and the inward gaze, a subtle metaphor. The road that leads upward to the heavens is the same road that leads inward to the soul. A flash of lightning split the sky. For an instant, the manor seemed to awaken. Light shimmered across the windows, and the narrator thought they saw movement, as if someone stood within the shadows, watching. Their heart pounded. A tremor of fear ran through them, though it was not a fear born of danger. It was a sacred kind of awe, as though they stood before something greater than understanding, something both familiar and otherworldly, both human and divine. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. Carl Jung, Ion. The narrator smiled faintly, though their chests tightened. They understood that beauty and fear were intertwined, for the greater the light, the deeper the shadow. The house might contain something dreadful, yet deep down, they knew. Every soul must face such a house before it can grow. The gravel beneath their feet was soaked with rain, yet each step felt lighter, as if they were walking within a dream. Faint memories rose, a woman's laughter, the smell of wood burning in a hearth, the echo of a distant melody. None of it clear, yet all of it pierced the heart, as though the house were retelling a story their soul had forgotten. Jung once said that the collective unconscious preserves the entire spiritual history of humankind, and sometimes we feel it through an inexplicable nostalgia, a mysterious sense of déjà vu. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. Carl Jung, the archetypes and the collective unconscious. Perhaps that was why the narrator felt both fear and love, for this house did not belong to one person. It belonged to us all. It was humanity's house, holding within it every story, every shadow, every dream we have ever lived. They stood still, gazing upon Sleepy Hill Manor one last time. The rain had softened, the mist dissolved, and the sky turned to a pale gray blue. The dark towers seemed to sink into the clouds. A strange peace filled the air, as if the house itself was waiting, not to frighten, but to welcome. They knew that whatever awaited beyond that door, they would never be the same again. For in that single moment, when their eyes met the manor's silent gaze, when their soul trembled between beauty and fear, the process of transformation had already begun. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, The Development of Personality. And so the narrator took a few slow steps forward. The sound of gravel beneath their feet mingled with the whispering wind. Atop the hill, Sleepy Hill Manor stood, solitary, magnificent, and mysterious, like a guardian of souls, waiting quietly for them to come and open the door within themselves. 5. The storm approaches. The sky began to darken. Thick clouds gathered at the horizon, crawling up the hill like heavy creatures carrying the damp breath of rain. The air thickened. The wind rose, weaving through the old branches, howling like a voice calling from another world. The narrator stood upon the steps of Sleepy Hill Manor. In their hand, the brass key was cold, heavy, and coarse, yet carrying the strange feeling of an object that had lived through many lifetimes. The rain began to fall, slow at first, like the opening beats of a thunderous symphony rising from the depths of the earth. They looked up to the sky, where faint blue flashes flickered behind the black clouds, and whispered softly, "It's just you and me tonight. No one else, only them. And the house. Only this fragile human being, and the ancient world awakening within the coming storm." The first gust of wind struck their cheek, cold and salted. The narrator inhaled deeply, feeling the damp scent of earth and rust fill their lungs. A faint aroma spread through the air, the smell of time, of memories left untold. The sky shuddered. Thunder rolled closer, and in that moment something inside them began to tremble too. A hidden part, like a long, sealed door, started to stir. Perhaps the storm outside was only a reflection of the storm within. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And perhaps this was the pain he meant, the moment when one stands before the tempest of one's own soul, knowing there is no turning back, yet not knowing where the path will lead. The wind grew stronger. Yellow leaves spiraled upward, whirling through the air before falling, tattered, to the ground. Lightning flared, illuminating the stone pillars and the wine-red windows of Sleepy Hill Manor. The narrator stood still, facing something sacred. Each clap of thunder shook their heart. Perhaps this was a calling, not from the sky, but from the unconscious itself, summoning them one step deeper into the land of shadow. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Carl Jung, Psychology and Religion. The shadow, the dark half of every soul, was beginning to reveal itself as the heavens fell. It was not something foreign, but intimate, real, human. The outer storm was merely a mirror, amplifying the roar of buried emotions, denied desires, and wounds left unhealed. They tightened their grip on the key, hearing the faint scrape of metal against skin. The key, the only thing between them and the house, had become a symbol of choice. To turn it was to enter the unknown. To stay outside was to remain forever at the threshold. And they knew no one else could make that choice for them. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung, CW 11, Psychology and Religion. The narrator closed their eyes, letting the wind roar around their ears. They could no longer hear the sounds of cars or people or the ordinary world. Only their heartbeat remained, steady, slow, and strong. The storm drew closer. Sky and earth merged into a veil of white rain. Lightning tore across the heavens, revealing fleeting shapes of trees and rooftops twisted in the storm. For a brief instant, Sleepy Hill Manor seemed alive. Its windows glimmered with light, its walls seemed to breathe, and its black spire stretched toward a sky split open. And they realized the house was not dead. It was waiting to be awakened, just as they were. They smiled through the rain, a fragile smile of both fear and exhilaration, because they understood now. What frightened them was not the storm, but the silence that had lasted too long within their own heart. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung, CW 13, Alchemical Studies. They whispered again, almost as if speaking to their soul. It's just you and me tonight. The rain poured harder, thick and silver like a curtain. Their coat was drenched, hair dripping wet, yet they did not move from the steps. They looked up at the house once more, and in a flash of lightning, they saw their reflection in the glass window. Another face, older, deeper, gazed back. A face that seemed to have lived here long ago, watching through them. A chill ran down their spine, yet instead of stepping back, they smiled. Because they knew this was not the spirit of the house. It was their own soul, reflected from within. Their thunder cracked, so loud it shook the air itself, and amid that chaos, something strange happened. Everything went still. The wind stopped. The rain hung suspended, as if time itself had stopped breathing. There was nothing left but heartbeat and breath. In that absolute stillness, they heard something. Not a sound, but a calling, a whisper from within the house, or perhaps from the depths of their unconscious. A voice that said, "Come in. The storm is only the gateway." And they understood. There can be no true light that has not passed through darkness. No soul can find itself without first standing in the storm. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Carl Jung, CW 13, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. They looked down at their hand. The brass key gleamed in the lightning's pulse. A raindrop slid down their cheek, cold as metal. They drew a long, steady breath, then stepped forward and placed a hand on the heavy wooden door. Tonight, they would no longer be an observer. Tonight, they would walk into their own storm. For they understood now, to be reborn, the soul must once dissolve into the wind. And as they pushed the door open, thunder exploded overhead. The door flung wide. Wind and rain rushed in, scattering everything, as though the house itself had just drawn its first breath. Outside, the sky still raged with storm, but inside, amid thunder and lightning, the narrator crossed the threshold with a tranquil heart. The storm had arrived, and the soul, at last, was ready to meet itself. 6. The door and the entry hall. The door creaked open just as the rain poured down. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind howled around the hill like the song of ancient souls. The narrator stood still, hand still clutching the cold brass key. They hadn't yet exhaled when the damp air swept in behind them, blending with the scent of wet wood and old ashes, the scent of years that had never truly disappeared. Then, like a quiet miracle, the lights inside flickered on. No one had touched a switch. The light seemed to awaken by itself, soft, warm, gentle, like a soul long asleep suddenly stirred from its slumber. The entry hall revealed itself slowly. Dark brown wooden walls, deep crimson velvet chairs arranged around the fireplace, a thick embroidered carpet like moss grown over time, and shelves of old books rising all the way to the ceiling. The space was silent, yet full of presence, a feeling the narrator could not name. Amid the rain outside, it seemed the room itself was breathing. They stepped in and closed the door behind them. The heavy door shut with a faint thud, sealing them away from the world beyond, where the storm still raged, and in that moment, the narrator knew they had truly crossed a threshold. The light in the room was golden, like aged honey, shining through the thin layers of dust floating in the air. Everything was still, so still they could hear their own heartbeat. A strange feeling spread within them, both safe and terrifying, as though they had entered a place where time had stopped, or had never begun. Before them, there was no staircase, no hallway, no other door. The entry hall was complete, enclosed, circular, and silent. Standing in the center of the room, they felt the warmth of the light mix with the chill of their soaked coat. And in that quiet, a realization surfaced. This was not merely the first room of the house, it was the first room of the soul. Carl Jung once wrote, "The house is an image of the psyche. The ground floor represents the conscious mind, the upper floor, the personal unconscious, and the cellar, the collective unconscious. Memories, dreams, reflections. If that were true, then they were now standing on the first level, the liminal space between consciousness and the unconscious, between the present and memory, the threshold where the soul begins to reveal itself." They ran a hand lightly over the wooden table, where a thin layer of dust formed a circle around an empty spot, as if something precious had once been placed there and taken away. That strange sensation returned, the sense that someone or something was still here. The wall lamp flickered, and for an instant they thought they saw a shadow pass across the far wall. But then the light steadied again. Only the rain tapped softly against the glass. They walked slowly around the hall, observing every detail. The velvet chairs, the woven carpet, the ancient shelves, all seemed to be telling a story, though the narrator had not yet learned the language to understand it. Each book on the shelf felt like a fragment of memory waiting to be opened. Each object, a piece of their old soul, parts they had lost amid the noise of busy years, amid lives that seemed separate, yet were always bound by an invisible thread. Jung once said, "The symbols of the self arise spontaneously in dreams, in visions, and in our creative work. They represent the striving of the psyche towards wholeness." Carl Jung, Ion. Perhaps this house was itself a symbol of the self, the sacred center where all the fragments of the human being converge. And this hall, the first room they entered, was the threshold of that coming together. But to move further, they would need to find a way out. The narrator looked around, searching for another door, some opening, some hint of light leading onward. But there was nothing. Only the thick wooden walls, silent as memories deliberately sealed away. They walked to the bookshelf and brushed their fingers along the dusty spines. Victorian Ghost Stories, The Secret Rooms, The Red Chamber. Each title carried a strange familiarity, as though the house itself was guiding them, whispering that the next path was not outward, but inward. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung, CWB, 11. Psychology and Religion. There was no physical passage, because the passage had never been external. The real door could only be opened from within. The narrator sat down on the red velvet chair by the fireplace. Their hand still held the brass key. The lamplight shimmered upon its surface, making it gleam like a fragment of light in the dark. They turned it slowly between their fingers, listening to the rhythm of the rain outside, drop by drop, like the clock of the unconscious measuring time by the heartbeat of the earth. Suddenly they realized everything in this room, the chairs, the carpet, the wooden walls, was waiting to be seen, not to be feared, not to be hidden, but to be acknowledged. In the soft amber light, an emotion rose within them, not fear, but a tender gratitude. After all the years spent chasing the noise of the world, this was the first time they had stood within the stillness of their own soul, and felt it was still there, intact, patiently waiting for their return. A distant thunder rolled, a reminder that the storm still lingered. But now they no longer heard it with fear. The storm had become the background music of their inner journey. They smiled softly and whispered, "Maybe the house has no exit, because I haven't entered it fully yet." They looked up toward the high ceiling, where the light formed circular halos, like mandalas, the symbols of wholeness that Jung once called the image of psychic completeness. And in that moment, they understood. The entry hall was not a dead end. It was the place where the soul pauses to remember that every door lies within. They took a deep breath, closed their eyes, and listened to the rain blending with the sound of their own breath. The brown wooden hall suddenly felt warm, like a temple. No need for passage, no need for a door, only presence. And in that gentle light, the narrator sat still, in a room with no exit, and felt freer than ever before. 7. The moving bookshelf. A flash of lightning tore across the sky, and thunder rolled through the heavens, shaking the old wooden walls. The lights in the hall flickered, as though breathing, reflecting across the table and the dust-covered rows of books. The narrator shivered slightly and slowed their pace. They still hadn't found another way out of the room besides the large door now closed behind them. The space seemed completely sealed, only the sound of heavy rain outside, blending with the faint, rhythmic breathing of the house itself. In that moment, something urged them toward the bookshelf. A wall of dark wood stretched across the entire side, filled with thick, faded spines bearing strange titles. Victorian ghost stories, the secret rooms, dreams, and reflections. The narrator ran their hand along the covers, feeling the fine layer of dust cling to their fingertips, a sensation both foreign and familiar. On the nearby table, a silver candlestick glimmered faintly. They reached out to touch it, not out of curiosity, but as if drawn by an invisible pull. The instant their fingers brushed the cold metal, the entire room trembled. A sharp crack echoed through the rain. Then slowly, heavily, the bookshelf began to slide aside. The narrator instinctively stepped back. The groan of wooden hinges filled the space, like the sigh of the past being released. Dust danced in the dim light as a narrow opening appeared, revealing a dark hallway, long and deep, leading into the heart of the house. For a moment, they stood there, barely daring to breathe. The air before them was thick as fog. A cold draft drifted out from the corridor, carrying with it the smell of old wood and memory. Every step they were about to take seemed not only to lead deeper into the house, but deeper into themselves. They didn't know why, but their heartbeat slowed, deep and steady, as if their very body were listening to something newly awakened. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Carl Jung, CW 11, Psychology and Religion. And in that moment, the narrator understood. This door did not merely open into the house, it opened into themselves. The light from the hall behind spilled faintly onto their shoulders, but could not reach the far end of the corridor. The darkness ahead remained vast and silent, like an abyss. The rain drummed on the roof, thunder faded into the distance, and only the sound of their breathing remained. They took one step, then another, their hand brushing the edge of the bookshelf, as if afraid that if they let go, the passage might disappear. On the corridor walls, small cracks ran like veins. The light behind them fell upon those lines, shaping strange patterns, like ancient symbols. A droplet from the ceiling landed on their hand. Cold, clear, startlingly real. At the far end of the corridor, a faint light shimmered. It was unclear whether it was a lamp or a trick of the eyes, but that glow, though dim, carried a gentle pull, a silent invitation, profound and patient. They walked on, heart racing, yet strangely calm. In the darkness, they recalled what Jung described in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, that the house in dreams often represents the psyche. The house is the image of the soul, and the deeper one goes, The closer one comes to the things one has not yet dared to see. The lower we go, the darker it becomes, and the closer we are to what is most real. Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. The words echoed through their mind. Perhaps the bookshelf represented the level of consciousness, where knowledge, memories, and beliefs are neatly arranged. But the corridor opening behind it, that was the deeper layer, where the unconscious waited to be seen. When the mind falls silent, the unconscious speaks. When words disappear, symbols begin to tell their stories. A flash of lightning cut through the glass at the far end of the hall. For an instant, the narrator saw their shadow cast upon the wall, long, distorted, merging with the shadow of the moving shelf. And they realized that shadow no longer matched their form. Who was it? The forgotten part of themselves, or the part waiting to be received? Suddenly, the darkness no longer frightened them. It was simply a space yet to be touched. To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. Carl Jung, Ion. The quote flickered in their mind like a candle in the night. The narrator inhaled deeply, feeling the damp air seep through their clothes, and took a few more steps forward. Each footstep echoed twice, once in the world and once in the soul. Halfway down the corridor, they stopped. There was nothing ahead, only emptiness. But within that emptiness, they heard a faint sound, the rustle of a page turning, or perhaps the sigh of the wind. And in that moment, they knew. The house was awakening. It was not a ruin, but a living being, observing, listening. And perhaps it had been waiting for them all along. They turned back for a moment. The golden light from the hall now seemed far away. The red velvet chairs, the fireplace, the embroidered carpet, all had faded into memory. Ahead, the darkness beckoned, silent as a second door. A quiet thought rose within. Perhaps this is the true beginning. Not when they arrived at the house, but in the instant they dared to step through the nameless door. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung, The Collected Works, Volume 9. Perhaps it was at that moment. The touch of the silver candlestick, unconscious, intuitive, unplanned, that their soul had quietly opened. And the moving bookshelf, shifting aside, was not revealing the house's secret, but awakening another chamber of the mind. The narrators smiled softly, though their hearts still raced. Ahead lay a long, endless corridor, but fear had begun to dissolve. Only one feeling remained, strange, deep, and profoundly real. The feeling of being alive, of being seen. They took another step forward, and the secret door behind them closed. The light went out. Only the rain remained outside, and the faint echo of footsteps, moving ever deeper into the house, into the waiting darkness that felt like the arms of their own soul. In that silence, the inner and outer worlds became one, and the passage through the bookshelf, that small quiet act, revealed itself to be the initiation of a new being. 8. The Portraits That Watch. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow and silent like a tunnel through time. Light from the wall lamps spilled softly across the polished wooden floor, reflecting a deep amber glow like aged wine. The narrator walked slowly, each step creaking faintly beneath their shoes. The air here felt different from the hall before, colder, heavier, as though it carried within it the breath of those who had once lived, dreamed, and then vanished. Along both walls, old portraits emerged in the dim light. A man in a tall hat, dressed in black, his eyes deep as winter wells. A pale-skinned woman wearing a string of pearls, her gaze both tender and sorrowful. Below them, a child sat upon a chair, eyes wide, clutching a yellowed book. And among them, in the lower corner of the painting, a small dog sat still, its dark eyes shining, alive with a strange, enduring light. As the narrator walked past, every gaze seemed to follow. No sound was made, Yet something in the air shifted. The feeling made them pause, lift their head, and realize they were being watched, not merely by eyes but by presence. They took a deep breath, and in that breath, a strange thought surfaced. Perhaps these portraits were not mere paintings, but memories. Each face upon the wall a doorway, opening into lives that had seeped into the wooden walls and merged with the soul of the house. The narrator slowly stepped closer to the portrait of the woman. The oil paint had darkened with age, yet the eyes still held light, not from the lamp, but from somewhere within the painting itself. A strange light, soft yet cold, that made the narrator feel seen through, down to the bone. Something about it held them captive. Outside, thunder murmured faintly, deep and distant, echoing the heartbeat of the house. As they looked around, the expressions on each face seemed to change, ever so slightly, yet undeniably. A man tilted his head, a woman arched a brow, and the little dog. It seemed to look directly at them, its dark eyes bright, warm, and loyal. The narrator smiled faintly, a fragile, uncertain smile. "Just an illusion," they whispered. "It must be the light." But when they took another step forward, every gaze shifted again, in unison. A shiver ran down their spine. The house felt alive. No voices, no wind, yet the presence was thick, palpable, watching every movement in silence. They stopped in the middle of the hallway and looked straight into the eyes of the man in the tall hat. For a brief moment, they thought they saw their own reflection within those pupils. Not the self of now, but another version, quieter, older, and sadder. A fleeting sensation passed through them. Fear, yes, but also recognition. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Perhaps these eyes were an invitation to step inward, into the shadowed realm where one must face oneself. The narrator slowed their steps, afraid to disturb the stillness. They listened. The rain outside had stopped, replaced by a faint sound, like breathing. It might have been the wind passing through the cracks of the wall, or perhaps the souls within the portraits exhaling softly. A gentle thought crossed their mind. Perhaps they weren't truly alone. And strangely, that realization did not frighten them. It calmed them, as if those faces were not there to threaten, but to witness. They were not ghosts, but quiet witnesses of time. People who had lived, loved, endured, and dreamed. Now they merely watched, not to judge, but to remind. The narrator stopped before the last painting at the end of the corridor, the one of the little dog. This portrait was simpler than the rest, yet radiated a strange warmth. The creature looked up, its black eyes glimmering with loyalty and empathy, as if it understood everything the narrator carried within. They bent down, gazing into those eyes, and suddenly felt a gentle wave of peace wash over them. A hazy memory flickered, the image of a small dog from their childhood, with eyes just like these. Perhaps what they saw now did not belong solely to the house, but to their own memory. Long buried in the unconscious, now awakened. A soft wind drifted through. The wall lamps trembled, light flickering, and for a moment the figures in the portrait seemed to move together. The narrator felt as though they were walking through a corridor of souls, where each painting was a fragment of the self, and each gaze a memory returning home. They drew a deep breath and whispered softly, "I see you now." And in that moment, the air itself seemed to soften. A faint shimmer of light slid across the wall, as if in response to those words. The narrator understood then. It wasn't the portraits that had been watching them. It was their own soul seeing itself through the eyes of the past. As they walked on, and the gazes in the portraits grew gentler, the faces no longer rigid or haunting, but serene, as if pleased that the visitor had finally seen what needed to be seen. The little dog at the end of the hall still watched, but its look had changed. No longer a stare, but a guiding gaze, warm and patient, inviting them deeper into the house, into memory, into the shadow of their own soul. A flash of lightning burst outside the window, illuminating the entire corridor. For a heartbeat, every face in the paintings glowed with light before fading again into shadow. But now, the narrator felt no fear. They smiled softly and continued walking, carrying a strange, tender feeling, as though the souls of the past had smiled back, blessing their journey forward. At the end of the hallway, a wooden door stood slightly ajar. The narrator reached out a hand, and in that instant they felt it clearly. They had been seen, heard, and touched. Not by the dead, but by the forgotten fragments of their own spirit. They pushed the door open. A pale light from the next room spilled gently into the darkness. Behind them, the portraits remained silent, yet still watching, not to hold them back, but to wish them well as they went on. 9. The central hall and the bar. The narrator walked through the narrow, shadowed corridor where the old portraits slowly faded behind them. Ahead, the space opened wide, round, still, and silent. The central hall of Sleepy Hill Manor emerged like a sleeping soul. A dim, amber light spilled from the tin ceiling above, reflecting across time-worn walls and long wooden benches draped in dust. At the center stood an old bar, its brown body polished smooth by years of use, its surface marked faintly by the ghosts of spilled wine. The narrator stepped closer, each footfall echoing across the floor like the faint heartbeat of the house itself. There was something different about this room. It still carried the warmth of life. The air was thick with the scent of burned wood, tobacco, and aged perfume, tinged with the lingering trace of strong liquor. They could almost imagine the scene that once was. Men in long coats, women in crimson velvet gowns seated around the bar, laughing, toasting, and whispering secrets under the glow of chandeliers. The soft hum of music, the clinking of glass, the laughter, all of it still hovered faintly in the air, as if joy had only recently departed, leaving behind its fading echo. They approached the bar and rested a hand upon the cold wooden surface. The first sensation was not emptiness, but a subtle pulse, as though, beneath the layers of dust and time, the house itself was still breathing. In the corner, a violin with a broken string leaned against a cabinet, and a row of cloudy glasses sat perfectly aligned, waiting to be lifted once more. The narrator imagined a figure once standing behind this counter, pouring drinks for familiar faces, telling stories, smiling softly and listening. Perhaps that person, too, had known loneliness, much like the narrator now. Yet they had continued the small ritual of wiping each glass, arranging each bottle carefully in its place. A simple act, and yet within it, the very essence of existence. The human need to touch something, to remind oneself that one is still alive. Light from the ceiling cast shifting patterns upon their face, interlacing brightness and shadow. Each movement changed their reflection on the tin surface above. A living image of two beings coexisting, the one who sees and the one being seen. In that moment, they remembered Jung's words from Ion. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. Perhaps this hall was not only the center of the house, but the center of the self, a place where all that had once been divided, consciousness, memory, fear, and longing, gathered quietly to merge again. On the shelf sat a single unopened bottle of wine. Its label had faded, yet inside the liquid still glowed a warm amber. The narrator brushed the dust from its surface, and as their fingertip met the glass, a shimmer of light flashed briefly or holding them still. That image, the bottle of wine that had slept for decades in the dark, felt like the human soul itself, buried, yet always holding the possibility of awakening. Jung once wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "In all ancient mysteries, wine symbolized transformation, the conversion of the natural into the spiritual." Yes, everything here was a trace of transformation. The house had lived, rejoiced, and fallen silent. Yet within that silence, it had been reborn, just as the soul must pass through its own winter of solitude before it can bloom again into a deeper, more refined life. The narrator sat on a high stool before the bar. The room was so still they could hear the rhythm of the rain outside, falling steadily upon the tin roof. The warm light from the lamp shone across their hands, revealing faint calluses, remnants of a life once consumed by busyness, a life too full of noise to notice silence. Now, in this gentle dimness, they realized something simple and profound. Human beings are never truly alone. We simply forget to pause long enough to hear the voices of what has always been. A soft breeze slipped through a crack in the door. The glasses chimed faintly, a pure crystalline sound like a bell ringing from the past. The narrator lifted their head and listened. Perhaps it was only the wind, or perhaps it was the soul of the house whispering, "I'm still here." On the wall hung a faded painting of a grand ballroom. Under its faint light, the figures seemed to move, glasses raised, smiles glowing, eyes meeting in the radiance of joy long since devoured by time. The narrator studied the painting and understood. Within those eyes was not only delight, but the quiet fear of fading away. Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "Persona is a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual." Perhaps those old parties, the laughter, the toasts, were masks humanity once wore to conceal its loneliness. And when the music stopped, when the house fell silent, those masks slipped away, revealing the deeper self, the part that never dies, still living within every human being. The narrator placed a hand around the glass and closed their eyes. They imagined sitting among the spirits of the old gathering. The people were still there, only in a different form. No laughter, no music, only presence, soft and weightless as breath. And they understood. This was not a room of the past, but of the collective memory. Everything that has ever existed leaves an imprint upon the unconscious. Nothing is ever truly lost. They exhaled slowly, feeling something within them release, a quiet reconciliation between themselves and time. Above, the tin ceiling caught a faint glimmer of light, a small flame that flared and faded. The narrator opened their eyes. The room was still again. Yet within them, something had changed, a silent awakening as though they had just raised a glass to the deepest part of their soul. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And under the fading, gold light of the central hall, the narrator understood. Perhaps to become oneself, one must walk through rooms like this, rooms filled with echoes of laughter, where the departed still sit quietly, bearing witness. They rose and turned away from the bar. The light from the lamp fell across their back, stretching into a long reflection on the wooden floor. In the distance, a door stood slightly open, leading to another corridor, where a new story awaited. The narrator stepped forward. Behind them, the hall remained bathed in gentle golden light, as if, in that very moment, the house itself were smiling. And from outside, the deep voice of the rain rose again, like a quiet benediction from a soul that had finally found its center. 10. The whisper of a skirt. The central hall was bathed in a faded golden glow. The narrator stood silently beside the bar, their hand resting on the cold wood, when a faint sound stirred behind them. The soft rustle of fabric sliding across the wooden floor. They turned sharply. The long corridor opened up again, hazy with dust and dim light. At the far end, a silhouette flickered, light as breath. Its shape was indistinct, only the hem of a white silk skirt gliding through the air before vanishing around a shadowed corner. The room sank back into silence. Yet this silence was different, thicker, more alive, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The narrator stood still, torn between fear and fascination. It was the kind of feeling one has in dreams, when you both wish to awaken and yet fear that opening your eyes might shatter the miracle. They walked slowly toward the corridor, each step soft and cautious, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. The air carried a strange fragrance, lavender and wine, faint but familiar, like a memory returning from far away. At the corner, they stopped. No one was there. Only a chill drifted through the air, dissolving gently into the dark. They looked around. The corridor stretched endlessly, still and quiet. Yet deep within, something in them knew they were not alone. The figures that appear to us are the contents of the unconscious, personified. Carl Jung, Man and His Symbols. That fleeting shape was no ghost, but a fragment of the soul returning, a part they had forgotten, dismissed, and buried beneath the dust of reason. The narrator whispered softly, "Is anyone there?" No reply, only the whisper of wind threading through the walls, sounding eerily like someone's breath nearby. Then, once again, came the sound of the skirt brushing past, soft as water, too swift to trace its direction. They closed their eyes, and within the darkness of their lids, they saw it. A young woman, slender, dressed in white, holding an oil lamp. She walked down the corridor, never looking back, leaving behind a delicate trail of light, fading like a dream at dawn. The narrator opened their eyes. No one stood there, but their heart beat slower now, as if it had touched something sacred. They realized then that the figure hadn't come to frighten them. She had come to guide them. In that moment, they recalled Jung's words. The anima is the archetype of life itself. She is the mediator between consciousness and the unconscious. Carl Jung, Ion. Perhaps the woman in the hallway was the anima, the forgotten feminine within, the voice of intuition and feeling that modern humanity has lost. She was the gentle whisper of the unconscious, calling them back inward, to the place where truth still waits to be seen. They continued walking slowly, carefully, each step a question, each breath an uncertain answer. The deeper they went, the denser the darkness grew. Yet within that darkness, they could feel something alive, the pulsing heartbeat of the house itself echoing through the ground. Suddenly, something brushed against their shoulder, light as a fingertip. They spun around. No one, only the air, quivering faintly, as if the unseen figure still lingered nearby, watching, testing, inviting them onward. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. That fleeting encounter, brief as it was, marked the first contact between consciousness and the unconscious. It confused them, frightened them, and yet made them feel more alive than ever. For every true meeting with the soul demands that we let an old part of the ego die to make space for what is being born. The narrator stood still for a long while. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and distant. They could hear its rhythm blending with the quiet breathing of the house, forming a slow duet between past and present, between human and shadow. Then a soft gust stirred the curtain at the end of the hallway. In that motion, they saw the white skirt again, gliding past, closer this time, clearer. The narrator did not run. They simply stood there, allowing the image to pass through them, as though granting the past, the fear, and the forgotten tenderness permission to move through their heart without resistance. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung, The Collected Works, Volume 9. And in that instant, they understood. The fear was never about the apparition. It was about themselves, about the part of their soul that had been silent too long, now suddenly speaking. Silence returned again, but something within the narrator had changed. The house no longer felt gloomy. The light from the lamp seemed warmer, the air lighter, and somewhere deep inside, a soft tenderness rose, as if they had been both forgiven and seen. They walked back into the central hall past the old bar where the glass still sat untouched. A thin layer of dust covered the counter, except for a small circular mark, as if an invisible glass had just been placed there and lifted away. The narrator touched it. It was still warm. They lifted their gaze to the tin ceiling above, where their reflection shimmered faintly. But this time, in the golden light, they saw two figures, themselves, and beside them, the woman in white. She tilted her head gently. A smile faint as smoke crossed her face. Then she faded, dissolving into light, leaving the hall empty once more, with only the sound of rain and the lingering scent of lavender. The narrator closed their eyes, smiling softly. They did not know whether they had met the spirit of the house or the spirit they had long buried within themselves, but they knew with absolute certainty that a door had opened. A door not at the end of the corridor, but within, and that quiet whisper of fabric passing through the night would forever mark the first moment they heard the voice of their own soul. 11. The piano room. The door creaked open, revealing a small room. A faint light streamed through a round window, falling softly upon the piano keys. Once ivory white, now tinged with the yellow of passing years. In the center stood an old piano, silent and dignified, like a living being lost in slumber. There was no human sound, no sign of movement, only the scent of aged wood mingling with the quiet fragrance of time itself. The narrator stepped inside. Beneath their feet, the wooden floor whispered faintly like the sound of breath. The room was filled with a strange presence, still, yet alive, silent, yet brimming with awareness, as though everything within it was holding its breath, waiting for something to awaken. They stopped before the piano. Their fingers brushed across the fine layer of dust resting on the keys. In that moment, they didn't know why they touched it, only that some invisible gravity drew their hand down upon a single note. A sound emerged, soft, fragile, pure. The note drifted into the air, touching it, and then dissolving, like the breath of a soul just waking from a long sleep. The narrator froze. The room remained empty, silent, yet within that faint resonance something stirred. A vibration nameless and tender, part sorrow, part warmth, part a distant calling. They stepped back, gazing at the piano as though it were not an instrument, but a door. And indeed, in that moment, it was. The atmosphere shifted, becoming sacred. The room seemed to breathe, and the sound, though gone, had awakened a memory long asleep within the walls. The narrator turned to leave. The door gave a quiet sigh. And just then, the sound came again. Not a single note this time, but a gentle chord. No one touched the keys. No wind stirred. Only the piano itself, vibrating softly, giving birth to a short, fragile melody, yet pulsing with a strange vitality. The narrator froze. Their heart raced, not from fear, but from awe. It was as though they were hearing a whisper, not from someone else, but from deep within their own being. The weak light from the window fell across the piano's body, casting wistful golden streaks. The narrator moved closer. The instrument remained still, mute. Yet within that stillness, something was alive. Invisible music, invisible memory, invisible soul. They placed a hand on the piano lid, and to their surprise, it was warm. There was no explanation, only the undeniable sense of presence. Perhaps the sound did not come from the outer world, but from a deeper layer within the mind, a forgotten part of their soul, now reaching out, trying to speak through each trembling key. The soul has its own autonomous existence and can enter into relation with us or withdraw from us. Carl Jung, The Undiscovered Self. The sound was the soul's return, not a haunting, but a reawakening, not a ghost, but life itself, calling to be heard again. The narrator closed their eyes. They remembered childhood, small fingers touching the piano for the first time, the sound of their mother's voice teaching them the early melodies in a room filled with sunlight. Those memories had long vanished, buried under the dust of years. And yet here, in this small room, the piano was calling them back. It needed no player because the true player was their soul, longing to come home. In every adult, there lurks a child, an eternal child, calling for unceasing care, attention, and education. Carl Jung, The Psychology of the Child Archetype. That child had never disappeared. It had merely grown quiet, waiting for the day we would be still enough to hear its song again. And tonight, the piano's whisper was the first message from that inner child. I am still here. I still remember how to dream. When they opened their eyes, a faint smile had found their lips. The room seemed brighter. Or perhaps they were. Everything around them remained old. The faded curtain, the cracked walls. Yet all of it now seemed to breathe in harmony with them. The piano no longer sounded. But within the narrator, the melody still played. It was no longer music, but the rhythm of the soul, something one only hears in silence. The psyche is the theater of conflicting voices. Even silence has a sound. Carl Jung, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the ground from which all sound arises. And within that silence, the soul sings in its own sacred language. The narrator turned to look at the piano one last time. The faint light shone upon its dull ivory surface, and it seemed, for a brief moment, to smile, content at last for being heard. They gently closed the door, sealing that small chapter of exploration, both of the house and of the self. But as they walked away, a sound reached them. Another note, soft, delicate, rang out behind the closed door. Then another. The keys were playing on their own, a melody, faint and tender as the breath of wind. The narrator did not turn back. They only stood there, listening, letting the sound wash through them like warm water flowing through the heart. And they understood. The soul never truly falls silent. It is we who have forgotten how to listen. Outside, rain continued to fall upon the roof of Sleepy Hill Manor, but inside, in that small room with the old piano, something had awakened. A memory, a song, a fragment of the soul. And for the narrator, that sound would never fade. For once one has heard the music of their own soul, they can never return to silence again. The piano room, where silence speaks, where one ceases to be a wanderer lost among walls, and becomes instead the listener of their own heart. 12. The Library of Forgotten Stories. The door creaked open softly, revealing a space steeped in shadow and the dust of time. The narrator paused at the threshold, gazing up at the towering shelves that stretched all the way to the ceiling. The scent of aged paper mingled with the fragrance of old wood, evoking the feeling of stepping into a temple of memory. A flash of lightning outside illuminated thousands of spines, in shades of brown, black, and faded gold. Each book a slumbering soul. The air was thick, heavy, yet warm, as though the room itself held the breath of centuries long gone. The narrator stepped inside. Each footstep echoed through the vast chamber. A draft slipped through the cracks of the window, rustling the pages of nearby books. A small but vivid movement, as though the stories were stirring beneath their blankets of dust. On a wooden ladder leaning against the shelf, one book stood out. Its dark leather spine glimmered faintly. Silver letters engraved upon the cover. Victorian Ghost Stories. The narrator brushed a hand against it. A thin veil of dust lifted soft as smoke, and at that precise moment, a peal of thunder shook the sky. Lightning pierced the window pane, flooding the room with light. And in that instant, they felt it. The books were watching back. They gently pulled the book from its place. It was heavy, exhaling the mingled scent of damp paper and passing time. They opened to the first page. The paper was yellowed, and a trembling line of handwriting appeared. To remember is to awaken. They smiled. A simple sentence, yet it felt as if it had been sent from somewhere beyond. To remember is to awaken. Perhaps that is what these books have whispered to one another through the decades, when no one was left to read them. As each page turned, the narrator felt as though they were walking deeper into a memory that did not belong solely to them. Between the lines, they glimpsed the shadows of countless souls, authors long dead, readers who once wept, spirits who had spoken through ink. Every ghost story, every fading paragraph, carried fragments of fear humanity once tried to forget. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung, Ion, the narrator, repeated the line in their mind, realizing that the ghosts in these tales were not of the afterlife, but of the inner life. They were repressed fears, unresolved memories, voices silenced deep within the human soul. A strong gust of wind swept through the window, whipping the curtain and brushing against an oil lamp on the desk. The flame flickered, casting light upon the books, each cover gleaming faintly like thousands of eyes waiting to open. The narrator looked around and suddenly understood. Every book was a forgotten dream. This room, with its endless shelves, was a symbol of the unconscious, a vast archive of the soul's fragments. Each title, each fragile page, was a fragment of human memory. What Jung once called the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution. Carl Jung, the structure and dynamics of the psyche. And now, amid the storm outside, the narrator walked through that collective unconscious, listening to the whispers of dreams that had turned into words. They turned another page and stopped at a story about a woman lost within an ancient house. The sentences trembled, unfinished, as though the author had left midway. A strange sorrow welled within the narrator, an ache that was both incomplete and achingly beautiful. Perhaps all human stories are left unfinished, and perhaps it is in that very incompleteness that life finds its meaning. The soul becomes only when it finds its story. Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Maybe the soul exists only when it has a story to tell. And this room, the library of Sleepy Hill Manor, was the vessel of that soul, preserved in the form of books. Outside, thunder roared again. A flash of lightning burst through the window, and for a moment the narrator thought they saw faint silhouettes moving among the shelves. They did not feel fear. They knew these were not ghosts, but memories returning, fragments of spirit gathering from afar. The room came alive. The books trembled softly. The pages rustled, 1,000 voices whispering their stories all at once. The narrator stood at the center of the room, feeling a warm current pass through them. They were no longer a visitor. They had become the storyteller. When the light faded, silence returned. The narrator closed the book and placed it back where it belonged. But within them, the story continued. For once you have touched these pages, you cannot forget. Forgotten stories never truly die. They merely wait for a quiet heart willing to listen. The narrator left the library, closing the heavy wooden door behind them. But as they walked away, through the sound of rain and distant thunder, they heard something. A faint sound, like the turning of a page. And somewhere in the darkness, the old stories continued telling themselves. They needed no reader. They needed no light, only a soul that listens. The narrator smiled. They understood now. The things we call forgotten are never truly gone. They're simply waiting for someone brave enough to step into the old room, open a book, and whisper to the past, "I remember." And in that moment, the stories awaken once more, like the soul of humankind itself, eternal in the rain of an autumn night. 13. The thunder and the rain. The storm had truly arrived. The narrator stood silently by the window, gazing out at the sky swirling in deep gray. Bolts of lightning tore across the darkness, illuminating the rain-soaked trees before vanishing, like the brief breath of a god. Thunder rolled, echoing from far to near, as though the ancient heartbeat of the house itself was waking after centuries of sleep. They inhaled deeply. The air was thick with the scent of rain, sharp, cold, and tinged with the fragrance of damp earth. The first drops fell, then thousands followed. Within minutes, the dark red roof of Sleepy Hill Manor was drenched beneath a torrent of water, each drop drumming a slow, solemn rhythm. In that sound, there was something both fierce and gentle, as if nature were trying to speak to humankind, in a language beyond words. The narrator sat by the window, leaning back against the pine-scented wooden wall. The whole house trembled softly whenever thunder cracked, yet instead of fear, they felt a strange safety, as if the sky itself were holding them. The golden lamplight flickered on the ceiling, merging with the lightning from outside, making the air seem to breathe with light. Their shadow danced across the wall, wavering with every flash, like a soul trembling between two worlds, the world of the living and the world of memory. Rain fell harder. Sheets of water lashed the window, streamed along the eaves, and cascaded down the stone walls. Wind howled through the cracks, carrying a wild, primal tone. And for a moment, it felt like listening to the breath of the earth. Amid the noise, the narrator's mind grew unnaturally still. All thoughts, all plans, all small anxieties of daily life dissolved. Only the deep present remained, as though time itself had folded in, leaving the world reduced to a single breath of rain. They closed their eyes. Behind their eyelids, flashes of lightning flickered like images cast upon the screen of the unconscious. Something within them was stirring. A part of the soul long veiled was rising. The rain was cleansing not only the roof, but also the interior of their being. The heaviness, the weariness, the old residue, all seemed to be gently wiped away, as if an unseen hand were brushing the dust off the soul. Each clap of thunder was no longer a threat, but a summons. Listen. And they did. They heard their own heartbeat merging with the thunder, resonating with the pulse of the house, and of the earth itself. The narrator opened their eyes and looked up at the ceiling where the lamplight trembled. That light, though fragile, did not go out, just like the inner flame of the human spirit which continues to burn quietly, even when surrounded by storms. Water is the commonest symbol for the unconscious. Carl Jung, Psychology and Alchemy. The words echoed within them, etched like an inscription on the wall of memory. Yes, water was the unconscious, and tonight the rain was falling from the heavens, as if the vast unconscious of the universe itself were pouring through the roof, washing away every boundary between them and their own depths. A bolt of lightning slashed across the sky. The light entered through the window, illuminating the entire room for an instant. In that sudden brilliance, The narrator saw clearly what daylight had failed to reveal. Tiny cracks on the wall, veins of time itself, an old portrait trembling within its frame, a pendulum clock patiently marking each beat. Then darkness returned, but the sound remained. The rain, the thunder, the heartbeat. 3 rhythms, merging into one soul: nature, the house, and the human. The psyche knows nothing of time. What is future or past is the present for the psyche. Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Indeed, in that moment, the narrator realized that time no longer flowed. It had folded into a single, eternal point. The thunder of tonight was the same thunder from centuries ago, when the house was full of life. This rain, perhaps, was the same rain once heard by those who lived here, who trembled, who smiled beneath it. And now, they were simply the next listener, hearing the same ancient song of the world. The room grew warmer. Steam rose from the wet roof, blending with the scent of old wood and time itself. The narrator placed a hand upon the wall, feeling its subtle tremor with every crash of thunder. A strange realization dawned within them. The house was alive, and perhaps so were they. Reborn with it. Outside, the rain did not cease. Yet instead of cold, they felt a profound peace. Not the peace of silence, but of connection. The kind that comes when one stops resisting the world, stops trying to control it, and simply allows the rain to fall. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Carl Jung, Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The storm was no longer chaos. It was another kind of order, the order of the soul. Within the thunder was rhythm, and within that rhythm, they could hear themselves, alive, breathing, returning to something older than language. The storm lasted until midnight, then began to soften. Thunder grew distant, echoing like the weary breath of the world after its fury. The narrator remained by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. Each drop reflected a fragment of light, like countless dreams, dissolving and being born anew. Within them, there was no fear now, only a deep harmony between the person, the house, and the storm. And there, amid the final falling rain, they understood. The storm had not come to destroy, but to awaken. As the last flash of lightning faded beyond the horizon, the narrator whispered into the dark, "You are not outside the storm. You are the storm, and the calm after it." The sky gave no reply. Only the gentle sound of rain remained, like the lullaby of the cosmos, cradling them into the deepest sleep, while the world, still breathing, dreamed on. 14. The stairway upward. The narrator left the library in silence. The wooden door closed softly behind them, leaving behind the scent of old paper, the fading echo of thunder, and the dim glow of lamps dissolving like a dream. Before them stretched the grand hall, bathed in the pale gold of flickering oil lamps. Outside, the rain still fell, steady and gentle, as if the entire house were breathing with the moist breath of the earth and sky. In the center of the hall stood a staircase draped in red velvet, curving upward like a ribbon leading to another world. The light from the wall-mounted candles shimmered across each step, making the carpet gleam as if woven from fragments of time itself. The narrator paused at the foot of the stairs, and for a moment, it felt as though they were standing before the entrance to their own soul. They placed a hand upon the wooden banister. The surface was cold and smooth. The mingled scent of varnish and damp air stirred a memory, one they could not name, only feel, with a strange and aching familiarity. Their first step touched the carpet. A soft sound arose, like a breath. Each stair did not simply lift them upward, it carried them inward. Each step was a contraction of time, a return of the past. On the first step, they remembered childhood, rainy, afternoons spent by the window, watching drops slide down the glass, feeling the world stretch far beyond imagination. On the second, they recalled youth, radiant yet fragile, filled with unfinished dreams, unspoken words, and loves that never fully bloomed. The third was adulthood, those years of learning to live but forgetting how to feel, when solitude slowly became a familiar room. And so it continued, each step a layer of memory, a stratum within the invisible structure of the soul, leading them upward through an interwoven dance of light and shadow. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The words surfaced gently in their mind, like a whisper of truth. The narrator was not merely ascending to the second floor of a house. They were awakening within themselves. Light from the hall below cast their shadow long upon the wall, curving with the shape of the stairwell. In the profound stillness of the house, their heartbeat blended with the rhythm of the rain outside. Sometimes they paused, glancing downward. Below lay what they had just left behind, the realm of knowledge, of old stories, of forgotten souls resting in the library. Above was the unknown, darker, deeper, yet beckoning with a tender resonance. The staircase was not only leading upward, it was carrying them through their own being. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung, Psychological Aspects of the Persona. Each step tightened their chest, not from fear, but because they were shedding the familiar skin of the ego. Every step was an act of relinquishment, of roles, of polite smiles, of everything they once mistook for self. The red carpet beneath their feet flowed like a silent river. Its crimson hue did not blaze. It deepened, like wine, like blood, like the quiet breath of life itself. It evoked something sacred and dangerous, as though each step upon it was a ritual of offering. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Carl Jung, Ion. The narrator understood then. To ascend is not to escape the darkness, but to bring it along. A tree cannot rise high unless its roots touch the depths. So too the soul. It can only move toward the light by journeying through its own long night. As they climbed, the light grew dimmer. The ceiling lowered, and the walls seemed to close in. Yet, rather than oppressive, the space felt profoundly still, like the hush before a dream begins. They could hear their heartbeat clearly, and within that rhythm was also the pulse of the house. The staircase, the living bridge between levels, seemed to guide their spirit through the very layers of the unconscious Jung once described. From the personal to the collective, from private darkness to the shared light of humankind. The unconscious is the matrix of the human soul, where the personal merges with the collective. Carl Jung, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. They now stood upon that boundary, where the individual melts into the cosmos, and the unconscious becomes the great symphony of all souls. At the midpoint of the staircase, the narrator stopped. They looked upward. The next steps disappeared into darkness, their destination unseen. They looked down. The light from the hall below now flickered faintly, a small wavering flame. It was then they realized they stood at the very center of transformation, belonging neither to the past nor yet to the future, suspended between worlds where time lost all meaning, and in that stillness arose a quiet peace, not the peace of completion, but the peace of finally ceasing to run. They allowed themselves simply to be, no longer the storyteller, no longer trying to understand, only to exist. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady as the lullaby of the cosmos. The narrators smiled faintly, then resumed their ascent. Their steps no longer felt heavy. The staircase, still deep red, was no longer a foreign path. It had become a part of them. At the final step, they paused and looked down. The entire house below now appeared like a memory, an old world fading away. The light from the hall shimmered upward, reflecting along the walls like fragments of recollection dissolving in water. And at the highest point, they heard something, very faint, like a whisper. "Welcome back." They could not tell whether it was the voice of the house, the soul, or their own self. They only knew their heart trembled softly. In the dim light, the narrator understood. The journey upward is never merely ascent. It is a journey of return. A return to the deepest part of one's being, where every memory, every fear, every shadow and light merge into a single breath. Or the staircase ends, but the inner path does not, for to every soul that truly listens, each step is a step home. 15. The child's room. The wooden door creaked softly open, and a cool breath of air drifted out, carrying with it the scent of old wood, the dust of time, and a faint trace of faded pollen. The narrator stepped inside, pausing at the threshold. The room was so small that 3 steps could cross it. Yet within that narrow space lay a kind of miraculous stillness, the stillness of memory. It was a child's room. The walls, once milk-white, had turned the color of aged parchment. Along the baseboards ran small cracks, like wrinkles on the face of an ancient recollection. In the corner stood a small wooden horse, its paint long worn by the passing years. When a gust of wind slipped through the cracks of the door, the horse swayed gently, producing a faint sound, like the wind brushing against a dream. The narrator approached. The horse rocked slightly, then stopped. That tiny movement, so simple and quiet, felt like the breath of a long, slumbering soul suddenly stirred awake. On the shelf near the window sat a few old toys, a stuffed bear, a pair of tiny leather shoes, several books with torn covers. Each object seemed to contain a fragment of a life. Small pieces of someone's childhood, now lying still beneath the dust. Light filtered through the thin curtain, patterned with drifting clouds, falling upon the wooden floor like a shimmering pool of water. Outside, the wind brushed dry leaves against the window frame, creating a steady rhythm, the slow heartbeat of the house itself. The narrator smiled faintly. They couldn't explain why, but the room reminded them of something distant. Another room, just as small, where they once lay listening to the rain, holding their only toy, believing the entire world was kind. Amid those dusty relics, they sensed the invisible presence of an ancient child, not the child who once lived in this house, but the child within themselves. The part that still knows how to dream, to play, to look at the world with wide eyes and a heart unafraid. In every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, is never completed. Carl Jung, The Symbolic Life. The narrator suddenly understood. This room was not merely a physical space. It was a doorway into the most original part of the soul, a place where time no longer moved, where the inner child waited, patiently, in silence. They walked to the window. Outside, soft rain was still falling. Droplets gathered upon the glass, sliding downward in long, delicate trails. With a fingertip, they traced the paths of water, as if rewriting the lines of forgotten memory. For a fleeting moment, an image appeared before them. A child sitting in a small room, holding a stuffed bear, staring at the rain outside. The vision was blurred but not unfamiliar. They realized this memory did not belong to them alone. It belonged to every human soul that had ever dreamed, feared, or believed in miracles. The child is both beginning and end, an initial and a terminal creature. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The wooden horse rocked again, as though trying to speak. The wind slipped through the doorway, stirring the curtain so that its movement resembled a gentle hand, beckoning. The narrator reached out and touched the wooden horse. The surface was cold, yet beneath that coldness pulsed a quiet warmth, a rhythm faint but alive. They remembered long ago days when everything seemed to possess a soul. Stones, leaves, moonlight, even toys that could talk in the imagination of a child. Back then, the world was not divided between what was real and what was imagined. It was one continuous current of life and wonder. Now, standing before this old toy, they understood. The magic had never vanished. They had merely stopped believing in it. While the room seemed to awaken within its silence, each object appeared to watch them, waiting for its name to be remembered. On the small desk lay a forgotten notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. The narrator opened it. Inside were only a few childish drawings, a sun, a house, a smiling figure. No words, only simple lines. Yet suddenly their eyes stung with tears. No one knew who the child artist had been, but somehow the picture was still alive. Like the spirit of childhood itself, never truly gone. The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity. Carl Jung, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. The narrator closed the little book softly. In that moment, they understood that the child within does not seek to be remembered through intellect, but through play, through the ability to relax, to dream, to see beauty in small things. When the room remained still, yet a subtle warmth began to spread. Moonlight tilted in through the curtain, brushing the narrator's hair with a faint silver glow. They closed their eyes, and somewhere within their heart, they heard it. A laugh, soft, young, crystalline. Perhaps it was their own laughter from long ago, and in that instant they realized the child had never left. It had only hidden behind the walls of reason, waiting for the moment when they would stop, listen, and open the door home. When the narrator stepped out, they gently closed the door. The room sank into darkness, except for a thin line of light slipping through the crack, falling across the floor like a faint gleam of memory. Inside, the wooden horse continued to sway quietly in the wind, and if one were to walk past and listen closely, they might hear it. A child's laughter, echoing softly under the moonlight. Not the laughter of a lost soul, but of the primordial child within every human being, smiling because at last someone had remembered it was still there. 16. The empty chamber and the painting. The door opened slowly, releasing a dry, creaking sound, the weary sigh of rotting wood. A chill poured outward, wrapping around the narrator like the silent breath of the old house. They stepped inside, and immediately sensed the difference. No antique furniture, no light, no distinct sound of rain. The room was empty. Only gray walls, cracked wooden floors, and a single large painting hanging silently at the far end. In the faint light spilling from the hallway, the painting emerged as the only visible glow within the darkness. The narrator moved closer, and as lightning flashed outside the window, they saw it clearly. It was Sleepy Hill Manor, this very house, but within the painting it stood amidst a raging storm. The red roof glistened with rain, the wind coiled around the pointed tower, and lightning tore through the night sky, illuminating the dim windows like eyes suddenly opening. And strangely, every time lightning flashed in the real world, the painting shimmered too, as though the house inside the frame was breathing in rhythm with the house outside. The narrator stood still, their heartbeat echoing with the storm's rhythm. In the flickering light, they felt the uncanny sensation that the painting was looking back. A strange feeling spread through their body, cold, mesmerizing, as though an invisible thread connected them to the canvas. The silence was absolute, only the distant thunder and the faint breath of rain on the roof. The room was empty, yet filled with a presence that defied naming, And then, in that suspended moment, they understood this was not merely a room, but a mirror of the soul. The soul is not inside us. It is the great field in which we live. Carl Jung, The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. The chamber was not empty because it lacked objects. It was empty because it contained infinity. It was the space of the unconscious, where all images of the soul are projected for us to behold, and the painting was one of those images, the image of an inner storm. As the narrator moved closer, in the painted tempest, one window of the house glowed with light, tiny, yet it did not go out. A small detail amid chaos, yet it held their gaze. The storm in the painting was the storm within: fear, confusion, buried wounds, and forgotten memories. But that window light, faint though it was, shone with consciousness itself, the soul's effort to illuminate its own darkness. Enlightenment does not consist in seeing figures of light, but in making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung, The Philosophical Tree. The narrator whispered the words, a chill racing down their spine. And in that moment, they realized, light does not destroy the darkness. It allows us to see it. Another bolt of lightning struck, flooding the room with brilliance. The painting flickered as if awakened. And for an instant, the narrator saw that the house in the painting was no longer Sleepy Hill Manor. It was themselves. That glowing window. It was their own eyes. The faint light within, their soul, and the storm around. The years they had spent fleeing from who they truly were. For a brief second, all boundaries vanished. The observer and the observed became one. The figures of the unconscious are as real as our own personalities. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The painting seemed to tremble. No wind, no touch. Yet the frame moved slightly. The narrator felt as though something wanted to step out from the painting, or perhaps was inviting them to step in. The emptiness of the room no longer felt frightening. Instead, it carried a sacred stillness, as if this place was the sanctuary of the soul. No furniture, no voices, only the silent communion between the soul and its reflection. They recalled Jung's words from the spirit in man, art, and literature. In the stillness, the creative power of the soul reveals itself. In this emptiness, a power was being born, the power of awareness, of creation, of rebirth through confrontation. The room, like a blank canvas, invited the mind to paint itself anew, with colors truer than before. Or they stood there for a long time. Outside, the rain continued, steady, distant. Inside, each flash of lightning lit the painting, then faded. Light, darkness, light, darkness. Each cycle pulsed like the heartbeat of an unseen being. With every flicker, the narrator felt closer to the house's soul, or perhaps to their own. The painting was no longer frightening. It seemed alive, and in the gentle tremor of the light, they felt as though the house within it nodded, as if to say, I am a part of you. The narrator slowly stepped back, eyes never leaving the frame. A faint breeze drifted through, and the hallway candle wavered, casting their shadow across the canvas. Two silhouettes overlapping for a brief moment. Then the light separated again. They and the house in the painting, each in its own world. Yet something had changed. They were no longer merely an observer. They had become part of the painting itself, part of the memory, the storm, the journey toward selfhood. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Ion. The narrator exhaled softly, as though waking from a long dream. As they turned to leave, the door closed behind them with a low, resonant sound that rolled down the dark hallway. Inside the room, only the painting remained, silent, yet the small window light within it still glowed, faint, steady, unextinguished. Outside, the rain kept falling. The storm was not over, but now the narrator understood. The storm had never come to destroy. It had come to remind them that a small light still waits to be found, deep within themselves. And somewhere in the darkness, the house in the painting seemed to smile. 17. The bedroom and the oil lamp. The narrator stopped before the final door at the end of the hallway. Their hand gently touched the brass handle, the chill of the metal spreading to their fingertips like a quiet reminder. This could be the end of the journey, or perhaps the beginning of another dream. The door opened. A small bedroom appeared in the dim golden light. It was not lavish, not grand, yet it carried a strange kind of warmth, the warmth of a place that had been waiting for someone for a very long time. On the wooden bedside table, an oil lamp was burning. Its glow was soft, casting threads of golden light across the walls, turning the small room into a cocoon of warmth amidst the darkness. Outside, the wind still blew, but here, everything seemed to have paused, even time itself. The narrator closed the door. The lock clicked. A small, complete sound, yet meaningful. It marked separation, as though they had just stepped away from the world outside to return to themselves. Where the bed was covered with simple white sheets, the mirror on the wardrobe fogged by mist, the curtains heavy and thick, all of it radiating a quiet, old-fashioned peace. The oil lamp's light was not bright, yet it had a life of its own, a heartbeat. The flame danced, leaned, and then stood still, fragile, yet unwavering. The narrator moved closer, gazing into the small flame. They watched the thin curls of smoke rise and fade into the air. In that light, their reflection appeared faintly in the window glass, half in brightness, half in shadow. And in that moment, they realized something profound. They were not truly alone. The room might appear empty, but it was not silent. It lived. It breathed. It watched. And in that stillness, the narrator felt the house watching over them, whispering, "Rest now. The road has been long, and this night belongs to you." They sat down on the bed, their hands still near the lamp. The golden glow brushed across their skin, weaving sunlight into their palms. Everything felt peaceful, a peace not born from external safety, but from inner acceptance. It had been so long since they had felt a moment like this, when all the noise in the mind went quiet, leaving only the sound of wind and fire, when the mind ceased to struggle, and the soul was allowed to sit down. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The narrator understood. This night was not merely for sleep. It was a ritual of awakening, a meeting between consciousness and the unconscious within this small room, beneath the trembling glow of an oil lamp. They lay down, pulling the blanket to their chest, letting their eyes follow the dance of light on the wall. The lamp flickered, creating moving shapes, at times a hand waving gently, at times a bird in flight. Light and shadow intertwined, wrapping around each other like the eternal dialogue between the soul and its unconscious. The little room was no longer a physical space. It had become an inner world, where the narrator faced the silence they once feared, and now found tender. Darkness surrounded them, but it no longer felt threatening, for within that darkness, the flame still burned, not dazzling, but enough to see the way home. The light one seeks is not found in the outside world, but in the inner darkness. Carl Jung, The Red Book. Outside, the rain had softened. Droplets from the roof fell rhythmically, mingling with the sigh of the wind, a lullaby of the ancient world. Everything was dissolving. Loneliness, fear, and the constant vigilance carried through the journey. Only one thing remained: breath. The narrator closed their eyes, Through their eyelids, the dim gold of the lamp still shone faintly, a light like the heart of the soul, beating slowly, patiently. The room, the house, the rain, all merged into a single, quiet current. And within that current, they felt a subtle life stirring again. Not from the world outside, but from within themselves. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung, Psychological Aspects of the Persona. This stillness was not an escape. It was a rebirth through silence. In stillness, the soul heals, like soil resting after a storm, waiting for new seeds to awaken. The lamp continued to burn, soft and steady. The narrator began to drift into sleep, hearing the breath of the house blend with the rhythm of their own heart. The room became a great cradle, rocking their soul between waking and dream. In that threshold between sleep and awareness, a whisper came, "Rest now, you're home." And for the first time in many years, they believed it. Morning came. Light streamed through the curtains, illuminating the oil lamp, now extinguished. The wick was black, yet the faint scent of smoke lingered, the trace of a light that had fulfilled its duty. The narrator opened their eyes, feeling as though they had emerged from a deep dream, or perhaps been reborn. They sat up and looked around. Everything remained peaceful, but within them something had changed. The lamp no longer burned, but the light within them had never gone out. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, The Collected Works, Volume 17. That first night at Sleepy Hill Manor was not merely a night of rest. It was the night they found themselves again, when all outer lights faded, leaving only the patient flame of the soul, burning quietly, yet steadfast. And in the silence of that small room, they understood one simple truth. You do not need to fear the dark, for the truest light has always been within. 18. The warmth of solitude. The bedroom was bathed in the pale golden glow of the oil lamp. The light was gentle, soft as a blanket laid upon the world, making everything around appear blurred and warm. The narrator sat beside a small wooden table, silently observing the old objects scattered before them, a tarnished brass telescope, a worn deck of tarot cards, a few faded theater programs. They lay there quietly, as though they had been resting in this place for centuries, witnesses to countless seasons of wind passing through the old house. The narrator reached out and touched the telescope. The metal was cold, yet the chill did not feel foreign. It was like the sensation of touching a memory that had slept too long. They wondered who had last held this object, who had once looked through its lens to gaze upon the world. Was it a curious explorer, or perhaps someone who preferred to observe life from afar, never daring to step closer? On the table, the tarot deck lay neatly stacked. The narrator drew a random card, the Hermit. An old man in a cloak, holding a lantern, stood atop a mountain in the dark of night. The faint light illuminated the winding path before him. The narrator smiled. Yes, that image was much like themselves at this very moment. A solitary traveler, in a strange room, accompanied only by the glow of a small lamp. Yet in that solitude, they felt no fear. They felt warmth. The room continued to hum with quiet sounds, the wind whistling beyond the window frame, the faint crack of wood within the walls, and the slow, steady beat of the narrator's heart, all blended into a soft rhythm, like the breathing of the house itself. The narrator leaned back in the chair, letting the lamplight drift over their face. Everything seemed to stop. Time, thought, worry. Only the present remained, complete and still. They could not recall when they had first learned to sit like this, unhurried, without needing voices, without needing to prove anything. Perhaps through the years, loneliness had once frightened them, but now it had become their most faithful companion, On the wall, the golden light cast their shadow onto the wooden floor, their figure merging with the lamp's flame, shimmering, alive. They thought, perhaps the soul is like that flame, never still, always moving, yet somehow retaining its shape, despite wind, despite time. They picked up the old theater program. The paper was thin and yellowed, the ink almost gone. A faded headline read, "An Evening of Dreams and Shadows." The narrator chuckled softly. How fitting. An evening of dreams and shadows. Perhaps they too were living inside such a play, where the boundary between reality and imagination was as thin as a thread. They set the paper down and sighed gently. They could feel the presence of the past in the room, not like ghosts, but like fragrances, fleeting and tender. The space seemed to hold the memories of those who had once lived here, loved here, waited here, and now it was sharing those memories with them, as though the loneliness of the house had found resonance in the loneliness of a human heart. Outside, the rain had stopped. Only the faint dripping from the roof remained, drop by drop, steady as a clock. The narrator looked toward the window, where mist began to veil the garden. The trees blurred into white shadow, and the pale moonlight shimmered on the droplets still clinging to their leaves. It was a painting without boundaries, a world where human and nature became one. The light in the room grew softer still. They felt the warmth spreading from the lamp, seeping into their chest. A warmth not born from fire, but from acceptance. Acceptance of darkness, silence, and self. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. The narrator nodded gently. They understood those words with their whole being. Loneliness is not the absence of others, but the loss of one's own voice. Yet tonight, in this quiet room, they had found that voice again, small, clear, and true. They stood and walked slowly around the room, touching each object, as if greeting the souls who had once been here. The telescope, the tarot deck, the faded paper, each carried a story, and by listening, the narrator continued those stories. The room no longer felt foreign. It had become part of them, a living space between reality and the unconscious, where memory and dream intertwined. They returned to the table and sat down once more. The lamp still burned steadily. In its golden light, they saw their reflection in the glass, calm, gentle, and somehow renewed. Perhaps they were still the same person, yet their eyes had changed, eyes that had learned to love stillness. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, The Collected Works, Volume 17. The narrator smiled. Perhaps becoming oneself does not begin with grand journeys, but with a quiet night like this, when you sit alone, listen to the wind, watch a small flame, and feel your heart soften. Loneliness, they realized, was no longer something to fear. It was the space of freedom, the bridge that leads one home to the soul. Like Sleepy Hill Manor, silent and time-worn, it still holds the warmth of all who have ever lived within it, the warmth of memory, of existence, of love. When they turned off the lamp and prepared to rest, the room sank into darkness. But the warmth remained, the light of stillness that no storm could extinguish. They lay down, closed their eyes, and let themselves drift between darkness and peace. And in that moment, they understood. Solitude is not emptiness. Solitude is where the soul finds itself. 19. The sound of the piano returns. It was late at night. The room lay immersed in tender darkness, with only the sound of rain, falling steadily upon the roof tiles. Each drop landed like a note in an invisible symphony. The narrator lay still on the bed, eyes closed, listening as the world outside dissolved into breath. The oil lamp had long gone out, leaving behind a thin veil of darkness where everything seemed to melt together. The wind, the wood, and memory. Then, amid that fragile silence, a sound arose. Very faint, very distant, as if echoing from another world. It was the piano. The notes were as light as mist, as delicate as breath fading into the rain. At first, only scattered tones, then slowly forming into a trembling melody, fragile yet alive. The narrator opened their eyes, staring into the dark. No one was there. No light flickered. Yet the music persisted, quietly, as though the soul of the house were whispering a forgotten song. They sat up, their heart beating in time with the melody. It felt as though someone was playing downstairs, in the room where the piano stood, the one they had touched earlier that afternoon. Back then, it was simple curiosity. Their fingers brushed against the keys, and a faint echo lingered. Now, the same melody returned, as if the house itself remembered. The old manor held a soul made of memory. Each note, each vibration, seemed to rise from its deepest layers, from long finished banquets, from those who once danced, who once loved, who once laughed and wept within its walls. The narrator felt it all, though they saw nothing but darkness. A chill ran down their spine, not of fear, but of awe. It was the sensation of hearing something that existed beyond the material world, the echo of a soul. They rose quietly, stepping toward the door. The rain still fell beyond the eaves, blending with the music until the air itself seemed to melt. The wooden staircase creaked beneath their feet. Step by step they descended, as though walking deeper into their own dream. Down in the hall, the piano sat silently in the corner, bathed in the faint haze of night. No one was there, and yet the keys moved, slow, delicate, as if an unseen hand were playing. They stopped in front of the piano. The rain outside thickened. The music continued, wavering between the real and the unreal. The narrator placed a hand on the lid. The wood was cold to the touch, yet deep within they sensed a pulse, the living heartbeat of the house, still telling its story through sound. In that moment, the narrator understood. The music was not coming from outside. It came from within, from their own soul, the part long forgotten. They remembered the distant days of childhood, when they had secretly touched their mother's old piano. The first trembling note, imperfect, fragile, yet it carried a pure joy they had never rediscovered since. Now, on this rainy night, that feeling returned. A tender nostalgia, as though time itself had folded into a perfect circle. The piano fell silent, a long quiet stretched out. Only the soft tapping of rain upon the window remained, steady, like a heartbeat. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow." Carl Jung, Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The narrator sat before the piano. They realized this encounter between them and the music was in truth a meeting with their own inner shadow. The piano was the voice of the part they had abandoned, the child who could still feel, still dream, still listen. Not every sound needs a player. Not every answer comes from the mind. Some truths arise only when we are silent long enough, when we dare to walk into the night and face ourselves. Outside, the rain began to ease. The sky opened slowly, and the scent of wet earth mingled with the fragrance of old wood. The narrator placed their hand on the keys. Just once, they pressed lightly, and a single note rang out, merging with the echoes still hanging in the air. It felt as if two worlds, past and present, conscious and unconscious, were blending into one. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. It was no longer coincidence. It was the order of the soul. The piano's voice was more than sound. It was the symbol of reconciliation between human and memory, between person and shadow, between solitude and life itself. They no longer played. They simply sat there, letting their breath blend with the rhythm of rain, letting silence ripple like water. In that silence, they heard more than in the music: the swelling of wood, the wind passing through cracks, and the faint beating of their own heart, pulsing in harmony with the house. A strange feeling spread through them. Not quite joy, not sorrow either, but something deeper: serenity. Loneliness was no longer an abyss, but a quiet room. A place where one could finally hear oneself. At the bottom of every transformation, there is a reconciliation between consciousness and the unconscious. Carl Jung, The Practice of Psychotherapy. That night, they made peace with themselves. When dawn approached, they returned to the bedroom. The piano was silent now, yet even without sound, its melody still lingered within, as if every breath, every step, carried a song that would never end. They lay down, closing their eyes. Outside, the sky was softening. The rain had ceased. A gentle breeze slipped through the air, carrying the scent of damp wood and wildflowers. And between the thin boundary of waking and dream, the narrator heard, once again, the distant piano, gentle as a breathing memory. They smiled. Tonight, the house no longer felt strange, and within their heart, a new melody had begun. 20. Sleep and dream. That night, the storm had passed. Only a few raindrops still fell upon the eaves, breaking softly like the sound of breath. Inside the room, the oil lamp had long gone out, leaving behind a faint, golden dusk. A warm blanket draped over the space itself. The narrator lay still on the bed, breathing evenly, the body slowly releasing its weight. Every sound within the house, the wood expanding, the wind sighing through the window frame, no longer stirred vigilance, but became a gentle lullaby for the night. Each drop of rain tapped upon the roof tiles, then fell into the gutter, humming like the ancient heartbeat of the world. The house breathed with them, slow, deep, serene. Everything seemed to merge: the breath of a human being, the murmur of rain, the warmth still lingering within the wooden walls. The narrator did not know when they had entered that fragile threshold between waking and sleep, that tender space where consciousness begins to dissolve. The body grew lighter, as though floating upon an unseen current. Darkness was no longer something to fear, but a soft blanket gathering them gently into its embrace. In that moment, they sensed something unusual. Not thunder, not wind, but the quiet pulse of the house itself. It was as if every wall, every brick, every curtain was breathing. This breath did not belong to humans, but to memory. The memories that had slumbered within the house for centuries, now slowly stirring awake. The narrator realized the house was dreaming, and they, the traveler, were part of that dream. A soft breeze drifted through the doorframe. The rain had thinned, turning into a mist that floated around the glass window. Condensation gathered upon the pane, reflecting their shadow, half in light, half in darkness, like the fragile boundary between two worlds, consciousness and the unconscious. In the dream, they found themselves standing within a long corridor, where light and shadow intertwined. The old piano sounded again, distant yet distinct, calling their name. Each step echoed slowly, passing by dim rooms where the stories of the previous nights had become still figures. The old painting, the oil lamp, the wooden horse, the flame in the fireplace. All of them merged, as if the house were weaving its fragmented memories into one coherent soul. In the dream, they felt no fear. They understood that they were descending deeper, down to the foundation of the soul itself. There were no words, no forms, only sensations, light, and movements soft as smoke. Carl Jung once wrote, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul." Carl Jung, the meaning of psychology for modern man, that door had opened, and they, the narrator, were stepping through it, quietly, slowly, without fear. The dream carried them into a familiar room. The dim light of an old lamp shimmered across the walls, and there in the corner stood the piano once again. No one sat before it, yet the sound continued, gentle, like the heartbeat of memory. The narrator moved closer, placing a hand upon the piano's surface. The wood was cold, but from within it, a warmth began to spread. That warmth did not come from matter, but from a silent communion between two souls, the human and the house. Then suddenly, the rain outside seemed to fade away. There was no sound, only breathing. All boundaries dissolved. They felt themselves floating between two worlds. The dream no longer carried images, but became a sensation, deep, smooth, like a bottomless sea. In that place, there was no I, no house, no night. There was only pure presence, where consciousness and the unconscious met at a single still point. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. Carl Jung, the archetypes, and the collective unconscious. In that moment, the narrator was no longer a solitary figure inside a foreign house. They had become part of the whole, of the universe breathing, of the night dreaming. Outside, the rain finally ceased. A faint light appeared at the edge of the window, perhaps the moon, perhaps the coming dawn. The narrator sank deeper into sleep, a soft smile forming upon their lips. Not because they dreamed of something specific, but because their soul had rediscovered peace. All that had once weighed upon them, fear, loneliness, unhealed memories, had melted into the rain, turning into vapor that rose upward, light and clear. The house was no longer a place of strange sounds, but a gentle living being, rocking them in the rhythm of its breath. Every wall, every wooden floorboard, every speck of dust carried a small vibration, like the cells of life itself. And as the first light of morning slipped through the curtains, the narrator did not yet awaken. They lay there in peace, as if held in the arms of the unconscious. The house, too, was silent, yet within that silence an invisible music resonated, the music of acceptance, of reconciliation, of a soul finally returned home. The storm was gone. Only breath remained, the breath of the human, the breath of the house, and the breath of the dream dissolving into dawn. Perhaps in that very moment, the narrator had touched upon a truth Jung once expressed. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to live with it. Carl Jung, Letters, Volume 1. Peace is not the end of the storm. It is learning to breathe with it. The house had done so for years, and now the narrator had learned the same, to listen, to dream, to flow with the rhythm of the universe without resistance. That night, Sleepy Hill Manor did not merely lull them to sleep, it lulled them back to themselves. And within that deep dream, where darkness merged with the rain, their soul whispered softly that peace has never left us. It merely waits for us to listen to the quiet breath of the night. 21. Morning in the mountains. Dawn rose slowly over the mist-covered mountains. The first light of day did not pierce through the soft veil of morning. It simply spread like a breath, pale gold, warm, and infinitely patient. The air still carried the scent of the night, and from afar came the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker, as if the forest itself were awakening. In the small cabin nestled among the tall pines, Sarah opened her eyes. She did not hurry. The first thing she noticed was the scent of burnt wood, the scent of warmth and peace. The fire in the hearth was still faintly alive from the night before, its amber light reflecting on the wooden walls, wrapping the room in a living glow. She sat up, wrapped a woolen shawl around her shoulders. Outside, wisps of fog still drifted lazily past the glass window, and the sun was just beginning to rise behind the hill. Each ray of light touched the cabin, as though it had passed through 1,000 layers of stillness, leaving behind a softness so gentle that one could almost hear it. Sarah stepped to the window. The forest lay immersed in a quiet gold. Pine boughs, wet with dew, fallen leaves hidden beneath moss, and the earth stained with the reddish-brown hue of late November. She drew in a long breath. The morning air was thick with the scent of pine resin, smoke, and cold soil. And in that moment, she could feel life passing through her. Not the loud life of men, but the ancient rhythm of nature, the heartbeat that the universe itself seemed to share. Each morning is a chance to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, The Red Book, that line had once found her in an old book she read years ago. Then she thought it was merely beautiful. But now, here in the cabin surrounded by mountain light, she understood. Every morning is not merely the beginning of a new day, it is the rebirth of a new self within us. She walked to the stove and rekindled the fire. Flames flared up, the wood crackled softly, the smell of smoke drifted through the room. Its light mingled with the light outside the window, forming two sides of the same flame. One born of the world, one born within. She brewed her tea, the sound of water boiling, the kettle brushing against the iron stove, the spoon clinking softly against porcelain. All became part of a quiet symphony, written for that morning alone. She sat down. The cup in her hand steamed gently. The warmth spread from her palms to her shoulders, then to her heart. There was nothing grand here, and yet everything was enough. When she looked out again, the fog was thinning, revealing distant snow-covered peaks. Golden light touched the treetops, glided over the cabin's roof, and finally rested upon her face. In that moment, Sarah became part of the landscape itself. No separation between the watcher and the world, only a silent union of soul and nature. Nature has no intention, but it is full of meaning. Carl Jung, Letters Volume 2. She realized that nature was not trying to teach her anything, yet if she listened long enough, she would understand everything. How light arrives without noise, how the wind departs without trace, how the forest lives, not through words, but through presence. Inside, the fire burned steadily. Sarah tilted her head slightly, watching the reflections dance on the wooden wall. Each time the flame reached upward, the shadows drew back, as if the whole room was breathing with her. Last night the rain had not ceased. She had woken several times, listening to it pounding on the roof, thinking the world was drowning in storm. Yet this morning, when she opened her eyes, she found only peace, and she understood. The storm had never been an enemy. It was merely part of the earth's breathing, just as fear and darkness are the natural breath of the soul. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. She smiled. Within her lived both the darkness of last night and the light of this morning. Both existed together, making her whole. A small sound made her glance toward the window. A red squirrel had leapt onto a fallen branch, pausing by the doorstep, gazing in with bright, curious eyes. Sarah smiled, broke a piece of bread, and tossed it outside. The squirrel blinked, then vanished among the trees. It was such a small thing. Yet it stirred something deep within her, the memory of childhood days spent watching the rain, believing the world could speak, could listen, could understand the heart. She realized how long she had been running from that stillness, chasing something out there, while everything she needed had always been here, in the wind, in the smoke, in the light rising behind the mountains. Her tea had cooled. She set the cup down, put on her coat, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, so clean it made her shiver. But instead of closing the door, she breathed deeply, letting the chill reach her heart until it felt open again. Before her stretched the vast world, distant hills, a narrow stream, and the pale blue sky. Everything was beginning anew, as if the night had never been. She stood there for a long time, simply watching, not thinking, not searching, not expecting. And then, within that silence, she felt it clearly. Peace is not the absence of storms. It is the ability to stand still within them. The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the golden morning light fall upon her face. The flame within her, the one that had long been fading in the rush of years, now flickered back to life, small yet steadfast. When she returned to the cabin, sunlight filled the room completely. Every object, the table, the notebook, the woolen blanket, the framed photograph on the shelf, was covered in a gentle glow. She sat down, smiling, feeling her heart illuminated in the same way. The morning in the mountains was as simple as any other. And yet, within her, something had changed. Last night she had been only a guest in search of shelter. This morning she was awake. And as the light shimmered through the window, mingling with the faint smoke still lingering in the air, Sarah realized, sometimes we do not need to seek the sunrise. We only need to open our hearts and let it in. Trick 2. The knitting ritual. Morning in the mountains had passed, and within the small cabin among the pines, the pale golden light of late November streamed through the window, falling onto the wooden floor, glimmering with firelight. The fire in the hearth flickered softly, spreading a comforting warmth through the room. At a small table by the window, Sarah sat still, wrapped in a thin wool shawl, and began to knit. The strands of merino and mohair slipped through her fingers, soft, warm, like a breath. The two oak needles tapped against each other in gentle rhythm. Click, 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 steady as a heartbeat. Beside her, a cup of chai tea sent up thin wisps of steam, the scent of cinnamon and honey mingling with the fragrance of burning wood and the faint chill of the mountain noon. She knitted slowly, unhurried. Each stitch was a breath. Each loop of yarn passing through her hands was a moment of pure presence, a quiet reminder that she was alive, here, now. Outside, a light breeze swept through the forest, stirring the tall crowns of pine. The sky was pale gray, and sometimes a single ray of sunlight slipped through, like a golden thread dropped from the hand of a giant in the heavens. Sarah looked up briefly, then lowered her gaze, letting the needles follow their quiet rhythm. She remembered her grandmother, sitting just like this, beside a fire, knitting and unknitting, telling fairy tales. Her grandmother used to say, "Each stitch is a prayer, and if you knit in silence, your soul will mend too." Back then, Sarah only smiled, but now she understood. It was not a metaphor. It was a truth only those who have known solitude can truly feel. She once lived in the city, a place where people measured time by clocks, not by breaths, where everything had to be faster, more productive, louder. But here, in the quiet cabin, as the yarn slid through her fingers, she realized slowing down does not mean stopping. It means returning. As the fire crackled softly, on the table the ball of yarn grew smaller, while the sweater in her hands grew longer, thicker. Sarah gazed at the color, a warm cream with a hint of pale gold, the color of autumn, fading, of morning tea, of sunlight softening at dusk. She had chosen it not because it was beautiful, but because it was gentle. It reminded her of those early morning walks through the forest, when the sun had just risen over the ridge and everything seemed half asleep, caught between dream and waking. She set down her cup, watched the steam curl upward, and gently closed her eyes. Through the haze, she imagined herself sitting between two worlds. Outside, nature, firm, cold, and powerful. Inside, stillness, tender, patient, and forgiving, like the yarn in her hands. A sudden gust swept through the forest, rattling the window slightly. She looked up and saw the first flakes of snow falling. They landed on the cabin roof, melting before they reached the ground. She smiled. Winter had truly arrived. Sarah kept knitting. Her thoughts wandered back over the path she had walked. The years of exhaustion, the relationships that had dissolved, the sense of direction lost in the fog. She had once searched for peace outside herself. In work, in people, in achievements, in appearances. But in the end, she discovered that peace is something woven from within, one thread at a time. It cannot be bought or held by reason. It can only be made. With hands, with breath, and with presence. After a while, the kettle whistled softly. Sarah laid down the yarn, stood up, and poured more tea. The steam rose, fogging her glasses. She laughed, wiped them gently, and returned to the table. The first sip warmed her chest, the ginger and cinnamon stirring her heart awake, grounding her again in that tender familiarity of self. The light outside the window had softened. She picked up the needles once more. Each thread intertwined like the rejoining of old fragments within her mind. She no longer felt as if she were doing something. She was simply being. She wasn't thinking of the future nor longing for the past. She heard only the fire, the wind, and the gentle clicking of needles, the rhythm of her own heart. As the sweater began to take shape, Sarah paused. She brushed her fingers across the soft wool. The scents of tea, smoke, and fiber blended together, the fragrance of life itself. It was a scent she knew would cling to the fabric, and every time she wore it, she would remember this afternoon, this stillness, this feeling of being cared for by her own hands. Once she had knitted for others, for friends, for lovers, for family. But this was the first time she was knitting for herself. And in that simplicity, she realized something profound. Loving oneself is not about speaking pretty words. It is about giving oneself time, listening to each breath, and knowing when to stop. The golden light of sunset began to fill the cabin with hues of rose and amber. Snow was falling heavier now. The room glowed in the mingling of firelight and fading day. Sarah set the sweater aside, stretched her shoulders, and sighed. Not from fatigue, but from contentment. She looked at her hands, rough, a little calloused, yet graceful and kind. She knew these hands had done more than knit a garment. They had rewoven her life. The small things of life were often the most important, and the true meaning was hidden in the ordinary. Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. She smiled. Jung was right. The small, simple, repetitive acts, brewing tea, tending a fire, knitting a sweater, these are where the soul rediscovers the meaning of being. Outside, night had fallen. The wind played with the snow around the roof. Inside, the fire still burned, its light pulsing softly on the wall like the heartbeat of the room. Sarah rose and draped the unfinished sweater over her shoulders. It was not yet complete, but soft, warm, and inexplicably alive. She turned toward the window. Snow continued to fall. The moon had risen, cloaking the white landscape in a tranquil silver glow. And softly, almost in a whisper, she said, "Perhaps happiness is not something to seek, but something to sit with, to knit, thread by thread, day by day." Then she closed her eyes and sat down beside the hearth, letting the firelight brush across her face. Everything around her was silent. Only the clicking of needles, the sigh of wind, and the quiet breath of a soul that had finally found peace in its own hands. 23. The first snowfall. That morning, as Sarah poured more water into the chai kettle and set it on the stove, an unusual stillness filled the small cabin. She lifted her head and looked out the window and saw that the sky had changed color. Thick, silver-gray clouds drifted slowly across the mountain ridge. The air had grown dense, and in that very moment, the first snowflake fell. It landed softly on the window pane, melted within a heartbeat, as if it had never been. Then another flake followed, and then thousands more, all of them light, white, and silent, like the very breath of the sky itself. Sarah stood motionless, still holding the wooden spoon in her hand. A slow smile spread across her face. She set the spoon down and stepped closer to the window. Outside, the world was changing its robe. The pines wore thin white crowns, the path down to the lake blurred beneath mist, and the roof of her cabin, once gray with chimney smoke, was now blanketed in a softness like feathers. Sarah lit a candle on the table. Its trembling flame reflected on the glass, where snow continued to fall. She leaned down and added more logs to the fire, listening to the crackle of wood and the spreading warmth that touched her chilled skin like an embrace from within. She sat in her chair, holding a cup of chai tea, and took a sip. The light spice of ginger and cinnamon, the gentle sweetness of honey melted in her mouth, slid down her throat, and settled warmly in her chest. Outside, winter had officially begun. The snow grew heavier. Each flake seemed to carry a breath, a pulse of the universe. Together, they formed a wordless symphony, one that only those who know how to sit still can truly hear. Sarah pulled a wool blanket over her shoulders, leaned back, and let her thoughts drift with the falling snow. She remembered the winters of childhood, when she and her sister would run outside trying to catch snowflakes with bare hands, only to watch them melt the instant they touched. Once, she had asked her mother, "Why does something so beautiful disappear so quickly?" Her mother smiled and said, "Because beauty only exists when you take the time to see it." Now, watching the snow fall again, Sarah finally understood. Beauty never lasts, and yet it is precisely its fragility that makes it sacred. She sat there for a long time, doing nothing. No knitting, no writing, no thinking, just watching the snow. Each flake was a moment of the present, born, dissolving, and perfect in its impermanence. She thought about the years that had passed, the escapes from the city, from work, from the noise inside her own head. Each time she believed she was searching for a new place to live again. But now, as winter began outside her window, she realized, peace is not found somewhere else, but in how one is present. She no longer wished to change the world. She only wanted to stay here, in this exact moment, where the fire burned, the tea was warm, and snow fell softly beyond the glass. Inside the cabin, the small candle flickered beside the white reflection of snowlight. Two hues, gold and white, blended together, gentle as two breaths in harmony. She thought, perhaps this is the balance Jung spoke of, where light and shadow, inner and outer, self and world coexist without conflict. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The snow outside was not chaos. It was nature's hidden order, each flake finding its rightful place, though guided by no hand. And within that order, Sarah found herself too, a small particle in the mysterious architecture of the cosmos. At times, the wind would rise, spinning the snow into spirals before letting it fall again. Sarah watched, mesmerized. Those spirals reminded her of the human mind, thoughts endlessly circling, seemingly aimless, yet in truth, part of the soul's natural purification. She recalled Jung's words in the Red Book. The soul becomes quiet, and the world falls silent. Yes, the world only falls silent when the soul consents to stillness. And today, in the hush of the first snowfall, her mind finally stopped. No more questions, no more to-do lists, only pure presence, without purpose, without expectation, without words. As evening approached, the sky turned a pale violet. Snow thickened over the roof, the window ledge, and around the tree trunks outside. Sarah rose, opened the door slightly, and stepped outside. The cold air brushed her face, sharp yet tender. and a quiet joy welled within her chest. She tilted her head upward, letting snowflakes land on her hair, her eyelashes, and her smiling lips. The sensation, cool, light, and pure, felt like being cleansed of everything she had ever carried. For a moment, she felt herself dissolving into the snow, becoming one with nature, one with the vastness that held everything. She stepped back inside, leaving tiny footprints across the thin layer of snow. The candle still burned, the fire still glowed. She closed the door, leaned against the wall, and took a deep breath. In that silence, she felt happiness, the kind that needed no reason. Not because the day was perfect, but because she was in it. Whole, enough, and awake. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. Outside, the world was dreaming beneath white snow. But Sarah, she had awakened in the first winter of her new life. Our night fell. She sat once more at the table and wrote a few lines in her small notebook. The first snow falls, like the forgiveness of the earth. I don't need to start over. I only need to be still enough to realize I was never truly lost. Then she closed the notebook and placed it beside the half-burned candle. In the quiet room, firelight and snowlight continued to reflect each other, two poles of the same sacred essence. And as she leaned back, her eyes slowly closing, she thought, perhaps the snow does not fall only upon the earth, but also upon the human heart, teaching it how to become pure once more. 24. The warm heart of winter night had fully settled over the mountains. The forest was utterly still, save for the whisper of wind through the pine branches and the soft fall of snow upon the cabin roof. Inside, the fireplace still burned. Flames leapt against the wooden walls, dancing like small spirits telling stories through light. The scent of burning wood mingled with the fragrance of freshly knitted wool and a hint of cinnamon from her chai tea. A warm, familiar perfume, like a memory long forgotten returning home. Sarah sat by the window, gazing down at the newly finished sweater resting on her lap. She brushed her hand over each woven line, feeling the gentle warmth pulse through the fibers, like the lifeblood of the living earth. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake glittering under the moonlight, blanketing the forest in silent stillness. She gently slipped the sweater over her shoulders. The soft wool embraced her body, around her arms, across her chest, light as the memory of someone once holding her from behind on a distant day. The warmth spread through her skin, reaching her heart. She smiled, not a broad, radiant smile, but a small, quiet curve of the lips. And in that moment, she knew she had come home. She stood and moved toward the window. The world outside was pure white. Moonlight spilled silver over the forest, the frozen lake, the cabin roof buried beneath a thick quilt of snow. Everything was silent, as though the universe itself were holding its breath to listen. Sarah placed her hand upon the cold glass, and her reflection made her pause. The woman staring back was no longer the weary, misplaced girl who had once struggled to find her place in the world. This woman's eyes were calm. Her face glowed with a soft inner light, the kind that can only come from within. And in that warmth, she knew peace had finally come. She whispered the words, not as a conclusion, but as a quiet prayer of gratitude. Sarah walked to the fireplace, knelt down, and stirred the logs with the iron poker. The flames flared brighter, crackling and casting golden light across her face. She remembered the nights before, the nights of wind and rain, when she didn't yet understand why she'd chosen to stay here, when loneliness had echoed through the walls and silence had clenched around her heart. But now, within that same silence, she could hear the music of her soul. She was no longer afraid. She no longer needed someone to rescue her, nor a reason to be happy. She had learned how to sit alone in the middle of winter and still feel warm, Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Carl Jung, Ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self. She thought of that quote as a guiding light. During her time in the cabin, she had met herself in many forms. The fragile one, the strong one, the lover, the fearful, the silent. And now, she understood. All of them belonged to her. None needed to be erased, nor chosen, only embraced. Outside, the wind rose, spinning the snow into circles. Sarah listened. Each gust whistling through the cracks sounded like an old song, echoing winters of another life, when she had hurried too much, forgotten the rhythm of her own heart, and let her soul grow cold, chasing things that were never real. But tonight, everything was different. She no longer felt time passing. She felt only a slow current of stillness flowing through the air, as if she, the cabin, the fire, and the forest were all breathing in unison. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung, The Collected Works, Volume 17. Sarah smiled softly. Perhaps, she thought, this was that moment. The moment she became herself, not through striving, but through surrender. She turned back to the table and poured more tea from the clay pot. Steam rose, hazy and slow, fading into the firelight. She sat down, wrapped the wool blanket over her shoulders, and let her body relax completely. Beside her, the little notebook lay open to its last page, where she had written only a few lines. The storm has passed. What remains is not silence. It is peace. She reread the words, then gently nodded. With her pen, she added one more line beneath them. And in that peace, the heart becomes warm. Then she closed the notebook. Outside, the snow fell softly as breath. The wind was gone. Only the crackle of the fire and the slow rhythm of her heartbeat filled the air. Sarah leaned back, her eyes distant, and in the dim light, the sweater she had made seemed to glow faintly. It carried the breath of her solitude, the mornings scented with tea and snow, and the patience she had once believed she lacked. She understood now. The sweater was not merely to keep her body warm. It was a relic of a journey home to herself. The fire began to dwindle. She rose, added more wood, and walked toward the door. Opening it just a crack, she drew in a deep breath. The air cut cold against her skin, but within her chest there was only warmth. Outside, the world shimmered silver. The forest looked as though it had been wrapped in crystal. The moon hung high, and the snow reflected its light until the whole earth seemed to shine. She whispered, her voice barely a breath, as though speaking to winter itself. "Thank you for coming, for teaching me how to stop running." Then she closed the door and turned back inside. The cabin glowed in the firelight, and in her eyes that glow had become part of her soul. The night drifted on. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but within the small cabin, a quiet spring had already begun to bloom. Sarah sat still, holding her cup of tea, watching the fire, smiling the smile of someone who had crossed a long season, who had passed through loneliness, and found herself again. No more questions, nothing left to seek, only warmth, only peace. And in that warmth, she knew peace had truly come.